Good day, everyone. Welcome to Deku Universe. Today we are beginning part 1 of What If Deku Became Japan's First Spider Hero. The fanfiction is created by Spider-Izuku on fanfiction.net. Now let's begin. New York City, New York, United States of America. It wasn't often that Izuku Midoriya got to see his father. This was mainly due to Hisashi Midoriya's job constantly taking him overseas to the United States, and that he was usually so busy that he rarely got vacation time. This was the first time Izuku had seen him in the flesh in roughly 3 years. The few times Izuku did get to see his dad, though, they were usually pretty awesome since the company his father worked for, the Cybermax Corporation, would sponsor or host big events ranging from trips to amusement parks, big expos that showcased all sorts of advanced scientific breakthroughs or projects the company was researching right now. Or in this case, they let Hisashi give Izuku a tour of the building he worked at, including his lab. Izuku looked in awe around the lab. No matter how many times I've been here, this place is always awesome. Hisashi smiled while bashfully rubbing the back of his head. Yeah, it is pretty awesome. A lot of people probably wouldn't assume that Hisashi was Izuku's father at first glance, as the majority of Izuku's looks came from his mother Izuku Midoriya. Izuku's hair and eyes were both green, while Hisashi's own hair was black while his eyes were blue. However, Izuku and Hisashi both had the same messy curly hair, as well as very similar facial structures. Hell, they both shared the same fur freckles on each cheek. The other thing they both had in common were that they were both incredibly smart in the fields of science. When he was 7, Izuku had torn apart their TV to figure out how it worked and then put it back together. Miraculously, the thing still worked. That was just the beginning. The shelves in Izuku's room, the ones that weren't loaded with merchandise of his favorite hero, All Might, were loaded with various machine parts and electronics that he had acquired from digging around in scrapyards and junkyards. Whenever he was bored or needed something to do, he'd tinker around with them and try to either get them working again or try to make them into something else. Beyond that, not a single one of Izuku's science or math grades had ever fallen below a 95%. Though that was a double-edged sword since it gave the bullies at school more ammunition against him. Not that he cared. As for his father's job, Hisashi Midoriya was a high-ranking scientist in Cybermax's genetic research division, specifically in the fields of quirk research and quirk genetics, which would probably also explain where Izuku's love of quirks came from. Since their building in Japan wasn't as up-to-date as their one in New York City, they offered him a lab there and a much-needed pay raise. Considering he had a wife and kid to support, he accepted. Noticing some animal cages on the far wall, he asked, "What are those?" Hisashi smiled. "Something new we're working on. Take a closer look." Izuku did so and peered into the cages, noticing large amounts of white webs, and some of the most bizarre-looking spiders he'd ever seen. The majority of them were the size of wolf spiders, but their colors were off. One was a balanced red and blue, one was straight-up scarlet, one was jet black with red legs, another one was white and black with magenta patches on its legs. But the one that stood out the most to him was a dark green spider with silver-white legs and a red mark on its abdomen. Too fascinated, he asked, "What kind of spiders are these?" "These are quirk spiders." Seeing the confused look on Izuku's face, Hisashi continued, "Let me start at the beginning. The project is an attempt by Cybermax to create new quirks, ones that not only have uses in combat, but can also have uses in medicine." Wow. Looking among them, he asked, "So, what all can they do?" "Well, all of them have slightly advanced healing. Not instantaneous, but give it anywhere from a few hours to a day, and they'll heal. They also seem to exhibit a sort of warning system for danger." One of the interns dubbed it the spider sense. That got a chuckle out of both of them. "Yeah, it's kind of silly. Aside from that, though, they're stronger, faster, their reflexes are increased, and they all show a very high resistance to poisons and toxins. The only exception seems to be ethyl chloride dash. That pesticide designed specifically for spiders," Izuku finished. Hisashi nodded. "Yep, but a few of them have a couple unique powers of their own. Like this little guy," he pointed at the black spider with red legs. "Watch this." He tapped on the glass, and the spider looked at him before scurrying back. And to Izuku's surprise, the spider's colors began to fade until it seemingly disappeared. Whoa! Invisibility. Hisashi smirked. Technically, it's adaptive. Camouflage. See, true invisibility would make the spider completely unseen to the naked eye. But if you look really closely, Izuku followed his father's gaze, noticing that right by the water dish there was movement, and he could just make out the spider's outline as it moved. Oh, so it's not perfect. He smiled and added, still pretty cool though. That's not the only one, Hisashi added, pointing at the dark green spider. This guy here is one of my favorites. One of the strongest specimens we have. Hell of a jumper too, but I suppose that makes sense since he was a jumping spider. 3. As if to prove his point, the spider swiftly jumped up to the top of cage, clinging there and looking out at them. He's a pretty fast one too, Izuku noted. Yeah. Looking at his son, he said, and these guys are just the start. With enough funding and research, we could possibly move on to human testing. Human testing? Izuku asked. Hisashi nodded. You remember when you were diagnosed as Quirkless? He sighed sadly. Yeah, how could I forget? That day had honestly been the worst day of Izuku's life. After all, how can you top the day when your dream was entirely crushed because of your own genetics? Your mom and I both felt bad because of that. But you kept pushing on, wanted to be a hero. Seeing that determination of yours was inspiring to say the least. That's why I've pushed so much time and effort into this research. Izuku's eyes widened. Wait, are you saying that if this works, you could give me a quirk? Hisashi nodded. And not just you. With enough time, we may be able to cure quirklessness PRD. Seeing the starstruck look on his son's face, he added, let's not get ahead of ourselves yet, Izuku. We've still got a lot of work to do before we get that far. But it's looking pretty promising so far. It may take another year or two, and if you still plan on going into UA, you might have to start a year late. He then smiled and added, but one way or another, I will help you become a hero. Unable to do anything else, Izuku hugged his father and said, thanks, Dad. Once they separated, his father replied, well, it is part of a parent's job to help their child achieve their dreams. Ruffling Izuku's hair, he also added, plus, whenever you end up on TV, I get to show all my friends and say that's my boy. They both laughed at that, but were interrupted by Hisashi's phone ringing. Looking at the caller ID, he groaned. Leave it to the higher-ups to interrupt a good moment like this. As his father answered the phone, Izuku lost himself in his own thoughts. He smiled, and thought if this works, I can get a quirk and become a hero. His expression then turned puzzled, and he continued, but what quirk should I get? There's plenty of quirks that can increase strength, but maybe I should get something to go with it? I've always wanted to fly. Or maybe I can get telekinesis like Mom's got. Or, see, you've still got that mumbling habit, Izuku? Jarred out of his thoughts, Izuku said, sorry. Force of habit. Don't feel bad. I used to do the same thing. Chuckling, Hisashi added, still do sometimes. Anyway, I need to handle something on another floor. You good staying here until I get back? Seeing Izuku nod, he continued, I shouldn't be more than a few minutes. Maybe an hour. Anything serious? Just an intern making a mistake cataloging samples. Nothing too serious. Opening the door, he said, I know I shouldn't have to say this since you're 15, but please don't mess around with anything. Don't worry, Dad. Izuku replied while pulling out his phone. I'm not a little kid anymore. I know. Just never hurts to make sure. And with that he left, leaving Izuku to his own devices. Since he had nothing better to do, he sat down in one of the chairs, coincidentally right next to the spider cages, and started looking through the Hero News app. Let's see if we got anything good. He skipped most of the first articles and a whole bunch of pictures of Mount Lady posing for the camera. Has she no shame? When he finally found an article that caught his eye. New hero Kamui Woods rises in popularity. Izuku smiled. Good for him. Guy's got skill and a good heart. What else? After giving it a quick read, he continued to another one. Endeavor solves another case. His smile changed to a frown. Meh. Never really liked that guy. Always seemed to care more about beating villains and solving cases as opposed to helping the people. Plus, if the rumors about how he treats his wife and kids are true, the dude's in but of the highest caliber. Passing it over, he finally came to an article that put a big smile on his face. All Might saves 500 civilians and defeats the villain Black Dragon. Huh. Now that's more like it. All Might was Izuku's favorite pro superhero, and the kind of hero he aspired to be like. a strong, confident, and fearless superhero who saved civilians, beat the bad guys, and did all of this with a calm and reassuring smile on his face. Whenever he said his trademark, "I am here," the civilians knew they were saved, and the villains knew that they were utterly screwed. Continuing to read through the article and look at the video clips, Izuku did what he usually did and started taking notes on Black Dragon's quirk. So his quirk allows him to create and control fire similar to Endeavor. But unlike his Hell Flame, Black Dragon's flames are far more dangerous, as any organic material caught in the flames will be incinerated. And once the fire catches, they'll burn for 7 days and 7 nights, or until the target is ashes. And no amount of water or ice can extinguish them. 4. That's a dangerous quirk to be sure. But it looks like All Might managed to stop him by nailing him with a Detroit Smash and sending him flying into the ocean. So does his quirk not work if his body's wet, or is he just weakened by water? I hope they figure that out soon, because if he gets out again, dash. Unknown to Izuku, when he had started his foray into the exciting road of heroes, the green and silver spider that had jumped to the top of its cage had noticed something. Apparently, one of its captors had neglected to make sure the top of the cage was properly secured. Sensing a way out, it crawled up and pushed the lid up enough to squeeze through the gap into sweet freedom. Back with Izuku, he was still reading the article and speculating on Black Dragon's quirk, his one hand resting on the small ledge in front of the cages. He was so lost in the world of heroes and quirks that when the sudden spike of pain came, it was the mental equivalent of being shot out of a cannon and through several brick walls. He looked down at the source of his pain, his hand, and saw a familiar-looking green spider on his hand. Oh no! How did you know what? That's not important. Moving quickly, he slipped the lid of the cage open and put the spider back in, nudging it off his hand with his phone. Before it could jump out again, he put the lid back on and made sure it was properly secured this time. Looking at the arachnid, he said, "Sorry, little guy, but you're probably a lot better off in there than out here." The spider apparently didn't agree, because it tried to jump onto Izuku's face, only to land and stick onto the glass wall. Izuku shook his head, a small smile on his face. "Nice try." He looked at the back of his right hand, noticing the 2 newly acquired fang marks and the red skin around them. Pulling out his phone, he looked up the symptoms of spider bites, specifically from jumping spiders. Fortunately, the venom of the majority of the species weren't incredibly toxic. At most, he'd feel pain, a bit of an itchy feeling, possibly a bit of nausea. Still, Izuku figured he should tell his father when he got back. Speaking of which, what was taking him so long anyway? Hisashi sighed, not really wanting to have this phone call. "Sir, I've told you we're not ready for human testing. It's been 10 years since this project started. You've got your spiders, now I think it's dash. Sir, if we rush into this, the results could be disastrous. We may get a stable reaction, or we may end up killing the subjects. Or worse. How could it be worse than that? You've never read a comic book, have you? If things go wrong, we could potentially create a horrifying mutated monstrosity, which in turn could infect civilians and turn them into mutants or possibly kill them. A possible mutant epidemic, and if the city doesn't get quarantined, a pandemic. And when the dust settles, everyone will be pointing at Cybermax and calling for BLD. You're BLD. Once he was done, he added, "Look, I want to save your son as much as any other doctor, but if we go this route, we get one shot. And if we miss or we hit the wrong spot." He left the statement hanging before he heard a sigh, and the man on the other end replied, "I know that. But the board of directors are on my butt about this project and how long it's taken to get tangible results from it. If we don't start seeing anything soon, they're liable to outvote me and cut funding for your project." Hisashi nodded. "I've got something that should work as a bone for the bigwigs. I just need a month or 2 to finish testing it. Don't disappoint me." And with that, he hung up, not even bothering to say goodbye. Hisashi sighed before pulling up a file on his phone. "Regan, hopefully this will be enough to get them off my back for a few more years. Plus, if it works to its fullest potential, we'll be able to help paraplegics and amputees all over the world. Assuming the bigwigs don't make it cost an arm and a leg. Pricks. Always thinking of lining their pockets instead of helping people." As he walked back to his lab, he looked up some photos on his phone of him, Inko, and Izuku. There weren't as much as he'd like, sadly, but they never failed to make him smile. They're the reason you're doing this, Hisashi. They're the reason you're on the other side of the planet at this job. Flipping to another photo of the three of them having goofy grins, he chuckled. Those happy smiles are what make this all worthwhile. Pocketing his phone, he entered his lab, seeing Izuku on his phone. He looked up and said, I think you might need to talk to someone about making sure the cages are properly secured. Confused, Hisashi asked, What do you mean? Izuku explained what happened with the green and silver spider getting out of its cage, with Hisashi looking equal parts surprised and annoyed. Up until Izuku told him the spider had bitten him on the hand, which immediately set off warning bells in his head. Are you feeling okay? He nodded in reply. Yeah, I don't really feel sick or anything. And I looked it up. Most jumping spiders aren't that toxic. Yeah, most jumping spiders, Hisashi said, pulling out a digital thermometer and a few other medical devices out of a cupboard. These are genetically modified spiders. There's no telling if they're really poisonous or not. Flipping on the thermometer, he said, Say ah. Rolling his eyes, Izuku obliged as his father stuck the device in his mouth. He then proceeded to take Izuku's BLD pressure and check his heart rate. Temperature's a little high. Your BLD pressure and heart rate are normal, though. Looking at him, he asked, You feel okay? Any nausea? Dizziness? Shaking his head, Izuku replied, I feel fine. Aside from a slight itch where it bit me, I don't feel any different. Nodding, Hisashi sighed in relief. Good. If your mother found out I got you poisoned by one of my spiders, she'd never let me hear the end of it. Still, it never hurts to be careful. So, I'm okay? Near as I can tell, you're fine. Putting away the equipment, he added, We'll check again tomorrow morning just to be sure, all right? He nodded, and Hisashi said, Good. Now let's get going. Your mom's probably done with her spa appointment and ready to see us again. How did you get her that appointment again? I know the right people. They both laughed as they exited the lab, unaware of the green spider in its cage giving off a soft green glow once the lights died down. That night at Dad's apartment was pretty great. One of the few times we're able to sit down and enjoy dinner like a family. Even if said dinner was 2 large pizzas from Pizza Hut, 1 meat lovers and 1 half cheese and half mushroom. That one was Mom's. Dad and I never brought up the spider bite, both of us thinking that it probably didn't inject any of its venom in me. And even if it did, it probably didn't do anything to me. Oh, boy were we wrong. As we found out the next morning, the moment he woke up, Izuku could tell something was wrong. After all, last he checked, the bed wasn't supposed to be on the ceiling. What the he dash? That's when he realized that the bed wasn't on the ceiling. He was on the ceiling, pinching himself to make sure he wasn't dreaming. He then carefully placed his hand forward on the ceiling, testing it and finding that he was still sticking to it. He crawled a little more, finding that his newfound adhesion abilities were still there. He was still sticking to the ceiling like a spider. And then he remembered the quirk spider that bit him. Did that spider's venom give me a quirk? It sounded absolutely ridiculous. After all, something like this could never happen. Not outside of comic books, anyway. And yet the evidence was right there. He was clinging to the ceiling, for crying out loud. Something he would have never been able to do if he was still quirkless. There was a knock on the door, and he heard his mother say, Izuku, sweetie. Time to get up. He panicked a little, wondering how he was supposed to stop sticking, when suddenly he felt nothing but air. Which was good, until he fell straight down from the ceiling onto the bed, bouncing off of it and ending up tangled in the blankets before he hit the floor. Hard. Ow! The door opened almost immediately, and his mother poked her head in, looking concerned. Izuku, what happened? I heard a crash and dash. I tripped and got tangled in the blankets, he quickly stammered, poking his head up out of his improvised cocoon. I'm okay. Inko sighed in relief. I swear you and your father are both the smartest and the most accident-prone boys I've ever met. Well, genetically speaking, I'm only half as clumsy as he is. She giggled. Anyway, your dad's taking us to breakfast at this one place that makes great pancakes. So hurry up and get dressed. He nodded. Got it. Be out in a few minutes. Once she was gone, he got up, noticing a blanket still stuck to the palm of his hand. Okay, he breathed. Let's try this again. He held his hand out with the palm facing down, taking a deep breath and thinking of not sticking. And sure enough, The blanket immediately fell from his hand and landed on the floor. Breathing a sigh of relief, he quickly picked up the blankets and made the bed, before heading into the bathroom to brush his teeth. And the moment he saw his reflection in the mirror, his jaw dropped. When he went to bed last night, he was still the same scrawny 15-year-old with barely any muscle at all. Everyone had him pegged as the weak, nerdy, intellectual type who wouldn't be able to hold his own in a fight, as it was his mother would often chide him for being too skinny. But his reflection told another story. He wasn't a bodybuilder by any means, but he had put on a significant amount of muscle, enough to look like he'd been spending a lot of time at the gym lifting weights, which he didn't, or that he'd been on a steroid regimen, which he wasn't and never would. Don't do drags, kids. Hell, despite his eternal hatred of sit-ups, he now had a six-pack. Okay, the sticking powers I could buy, but what the hell was in that spider's venom that did this? His stomach then rumbled, reminding him of breakfast, so he quickly brushed his teeth and got dressed. His clothes definitely didn't feel as baggy as usual, but he did notice that his pants seemed a little smaller. Not terribly so, but enough that he made a mental note to ask his mom to up his pant size before the new school year. The shirt was fine, but mostly because it was a hand-me-down from his dad, who was an XL as opposed to Izuku's own large. Even then it felt smaller than it was yesterday. Well, at least nobody can call me skinny anymore, he thought triumphantly. Once he was dressed, he walked out into the living room. His father looked at him and blinked. You go through a growth spurt, Izuku? Izuku shook his head, checking to see that his mother wasn't around, before saying, I think it's a side effect of the spider bite. Hisashi's eyes widened. You sure? Nodding, he added, that's not the only one, though. This morning I woke up on the ceiling, and I was able to crawl on it. Like a spider. Do you think Dash? Honestly, I don't know. Nothing like this has ever happened before. I'm mostly just hoping you don't start growing extra arms. Me too. Once we get breakfast, we'll head back to my lab and run some tests. Tests for what? Both of them turned to see Inko walking into the room with her purse. Looking concerned, she asked, and what exactly do you mean extra arms? Hayashi winced. Oh boy, am I in trouble? Nice knowing you, Dad. Yeah, Mom didn't exactly take the fact that I got bit by Dad's science experiment and now had superpowers well. Once she was done fussing over me and asking me if I was okay, she proceeded to berate Dad for not making sure the cages were secure and for not telling her about all of this last night, to which he apologized profusely. Then she proceeded to use her telekinesis quirk to grab a nearby frying pan and hit him on the head with it. Yeah, Mom can be a bit scary at times. Anyway, Mom wanted us to rush to the lab immediately, but Dad quickly calmed her down and pointed out if I was in any serious danger it would have shown by now. Still, we ended up getting those pancakes to go and ate them on the ride to Cybermax Tower. Once we got there, it was time to start running the tests. Oh boy. Once they got to Hisashi's lab, he drew some of Izuku's BLD to run it through a DNA scanner. This was to see the effects that the results for that would probably take about an hour, maybe two. So while the tests were being ran, they moved on a physical testing down in one of the tower's exercise rooms. Said physical testing involved a run on a treadmill to test his stamina, a strength test involving Cybermax's new adjustable weight system, a grip test, a standing long jump, a 50-meter dash, and a few other basic tests they'd have you do in gym class at school as basic exercises. Normally, Izuku would have barely been able to pass these exercises due to his weak and wimpy frame and utter lack of stamina. But now, he was able to lift the weight equivalent of a decent-sized car, though he had to push himself to do so. His father figured that as he got older and kept using it, he may actually get stronger. He managed to breeze through the 50-meter dash in 5 seconds, a vast and welcome improvement from his usual time in gym class. The grip test was inconclusive, frankly because Izuku gripped the machine so hard the thing broke. Don't apologize, Izuku. Those were last year's model. We're getting new ones delivered next week. The standing long jump was also inconclusive, frankly because when Izuku jumped, he managed to jump all the way across the mat to the other end of the room before slamming into the wall a good 10 or so feet off the ground. Ow. Inko winced. You okay, sweetie? Adhering himself to the wall, he shook himself and replied, I'm okay. Guess that's what happens when you have jumping spider DNA. Gonna need to test that one outside later, Hisashi noted. Moving on. The rest of the tests flew by. save for the treadmill test. Hisashi decided to give Izuku a chance to catch his breath to measure the full extent of his stamina. That proved to be a mistake, as Izuku ran for a full hour before his father told him to give it a rest. Why? You pretty much climbed the stairs to the top of the Empire State Building. Once Izuku used one of the showers to clean himself up, they all went back to Hisashi's lab so he could analyze the results for Izuku's physical tests and the BLD testing. So, based on what the machine gleaned from your BLD, the spider's venom has altered your DNA, Hisashi stated. A tad obvious given your new physique and your little ceiling cling this morning. But the changes extend far more than just new muscle and clinging to walls. Looking over his notes, he continued, based on all the tests, you have a spider's proportionate strength, speed, reflexes, and agility. And considering my massive leap back into that wall, Izuku added, the jumping spider DNA gave me a super jump. Hisashi nodded. Yeah. From what I'm seeing, though, there's no other major physical changes. So we don't need to worry about you growing extra eyes or arms. Thank God for that. Inko said, breathing a sigh of relief. But are these permanent? Izuku asked. I'd hate to think I just got a quirk only to find out that it's going to just cut out on me. His father chuckled a little. Don't worry, son. From what I'm seeing, these changes aren't going away anytime soon. Seeing the look from his wife, he added, and there don't look to be any negative health effects either, honey. He's perfectly healthy. And with proper diet and exercise, he will continue to be for many years from now. Izuku was beside himself with joy. He couldn't believe it. All his life, he had been powerless, useless, deemed unimportant by his peers because he had been unfortunate enough to be born without a quirk, without any sort of power. But now he had power. Now he wasn't worthless. His dream of being a hero, what most people would think was impossible to someone who was quirkless, was now suddenly a whole lot closer than it had been before he'd been bitten by that blessed spider. Okay, maybe he was taking it too far with the blessed spider bit, but his point still stood. I have a quirk now. Is everything ready? A monotone, almost bored-sounding voice replied, yes, sir. Follow the orders I gave you. All of them. The man seemed to want to argue, to speak out against the man on the other end of the phone. But then his eyes flashed silver for the briefest of moments, and that feeling of rebellion was crushed. Understood. Hanging up the phone, the man picked up a silver briefcase and walked out of the janitor's closet and into the hallway of the ground floor of the Cybermax main building, his face blank and emotionless the whole time and a slight silver glow in his eyes. The smile on Izuku's face never left as he and his mother rode down in the elevator. The two of them were going to go to Central Park to properly test his new jumping abilities the spider gave him. And Central Park was one of the few places in the city that allowed people to use their quirks without licenses, provided they didn't use them to start fights or cause a whole bunch of collateral damage. So it was the perfect place for him to test out his spider jump. With his mother's supervision, of course. His father originally planned to come with them, but sadly he got a call from one of the higher-ups, and they needed him up on the 66th floor. So instead he asked Inko to record everything on her phone and for Izuku to take notes. Inko obliged, but joked that he owed her a romantic dinner at that one restaurant the two of them went to when Hisashi first started working over there, to which he immediately agreed. The elevator ride down was quiet, save for Izuku having a mumble storm while writing in a new journal, where he kept it she didn't know, about his new quirk. She smiled at that, as it reminded her so much of Hisashi back when they were his age. Like father, like son, she mused. Once they reached the ground floor, the two of them disembarked and headed to the front door. But as they made it to the reception area, Izuku bumped into one of the workers there. Oops. Sorry about that, he quickly said. I wasn't Dash. The words died in his throat as a strange feeling overcame him. Something similar to when you feel a cold chill on the back of your neck and the hairs on it stand up on end. Only this cold feeling was felt all over his body, which tensed up like he may need to spring into action at any time. The man either didn't notice or didn't care, but uttered a quick, just watch where you're going next time, and shot Izuku a glare before walking away, his hand noticeably tightening around the silver briefcase he was carrying. And Izuku could have sworn his eyes flash a sinister silver for the briefest of seconds. Wonder what kind of quirk he has that does that to his eyes? Fortunately, he was snapped out of his brief thoughts when his mother called for him, and they walked out through the front door, unaware that things were about to take a turn for the worst. The man walked down the hallway and down several flights of stairs until he arrived at the door marked security room. Swiping his keycard, he walked through and saw one other guard in the room. The guard turned around and gave him a confused look. "Bill, the hell you doing here? Your shift's not 4-." Before the guard could finish his sentence, Bill quickly pulled out his pistol, which had a silencer attached, and fired one round. Had the other guard understood what was happening, he would have been confused that the muzzle flash was a strange silvery black, and that the bullet itself was glowing and left a similar colored energy trail. Sadly, he'd never get the chance, as the glowing bullet nailed him right in the chest, bursting out through the other side and nailing the far wall. His life fading from him, he fell to the ground, dead within minutes. Unfazed by his act of murder, Bill walked past the now dead security guard and right to the control console, placing the silver briefcase on his lap before finally opening it and revealing its contents: a black flash drive and a wooden opera mask that was made to look like the face of a Chinese demon. Plugging the flash drive into one of the ports on the console, he clicked on the prompt that popped up that said execute. The screens then promptly started flashing through multiple windows before finally showing several error messages as the virus worked its course, disabling the building's security systems and all the locks on the doors. Once it was finished, he placed the block upon the console before pulling out his phone again and dialing the only number on it. Once someone picked up, he said, "It's done, sir." "Good. Meet us in the reception area." He nodded, hanging up the phone before putting on the mask and turning to leave the room. But before he did, he aimed his gun at the console and screens and unloaded the rest of the clip into it, quickly reducing it all to a pile of sparking and smoldering junk. Smiling under his mask, he released the empty clip and loaded a fresh one into his gun. Everything in the reception area was perfectly calm. Employees were clocking in or clocking out for work. A few people were waiting for job interviews or other appointments. 2 security guards were at opposite ends of the area, one looking absolutely bored while the other one was tapping his earpiece and looking confused. "Jamie? Jamie, come in." All that came through his earpiece was static. Concerned, he tapped it again and said, "Guys, I'm not getting anything from Jamie. Is something wrong with my radio?" He never got an answer to that question, as at that moment the sliding glass doors opened, and a group of men wearing black suits and similar masks to Bill walked in, all of them holding assault rifles. As the 2 guards saw this, they moved to pull out their handguns. But sadly, the masked men were quicker and dropped them both with a spray of silver-black bullets. As they fell to the ground and the people began to panic, one of the men pointed his handgun straight up and fired twice, ending the panic. "Now listen up," he roared. "This got do as we say, and you all live. Anyone tries to be a hero, you'll be leaving this building in a body bag." With his piece said, he walked over to the receptionist. "Where's the board of directors?" he growled. Scared out of her mind, the receptionist stammered, "T to 66th floor." If he smiled or looked grateful, it couldn't be seen because of the mask. "Thank you for your cooperation." He turned to walk away, but quickly added, "Oh, and don't bother with that silent alarm. Salvation's not coming anytime soon." Looking at 5 of his cohorts, he spoke to them in Chinese. "You 2 stay here and make sure there's no funny business." Once they nodded, he pointed at 5 others, each holding duffel bags. "Get to work, and remember, every floor." They also nodded, walking off and entering the elevators except one. Looking at the remaining 7, he said, "Let's go. It's time for our appointment." As they walked to the last remaining elevator, Bill arrived. "Alarms and phones are all disabled." "Good." He patted him on the shoulder. "Welcome to the Inner Demons." Izuku didn't know what was going on. About halfway on their walk to Central Park, since neither wanted to take a cab so they could see the sights, he and his mom were crossing the street when he felt the familiar chill on the back of his neck. He paused, looking around to see what was going on, and that's when he saw it. A truck had just blown past the red light, apparently not caring that there were still pedestrians in the crosswalk. And it was seconds away from hitting his mom, who was now at least 5 feet away from him. Without even thinking, he tensed up his legs and shot forward, grabbing his mom and pushing the 2 of them to the other side, the truck missing Izuku's foot by mere inches. Safely on the other side, Izuku, looking in the direction of the truck, and angrily yelled, "Red means stop," but, looking to his mom, He asked, "You okay, Mom?" Shakily getting to her feet, she nodded. "Why, yes. Thanks, Izu. How'd you know that truck was coming?" "I don't know. I just had this feeling like something bad was going to happen." He froze, a feeling of utter dread coursing through him as he broke out in cold sweat. Seeing this, Inko asked Izuku, "What's wrong?" "Before we left, I had the same feeling when I ran into that guy. The one with the silver briefcase." His eyes widened. "Oh God, Dad." Before Inko could even blink, Izuku had shot off, jumping across the street with an enhanced jump and then tearing through the crowded street. "Izuku," she called out, even though she knew it was futile. So instead she pulled out her phone and hit Hisashi's number on speed dial, while rapidly muttering, "Please be all right. Please be all right," under her breath. I didn't know it at the time, but that day wound up becoming one of the most important days of my life. Too bad it was also one of the most tragic. With how fast I was running, it took me all of 10 minutes to make it back to the Cybermax building. When I arrived, I saw that the security shutters had been lowered so nobody could see inside, and that there was a crowd of people outside looking at the building confused. I heard a few questions like if there was a security breach or if they were being quarantined, and then another guy asked where the police were. That confused me too, seeing as how the building had alarms that would automatically alert the police if something had gone wrong. A million horrible scenarios flashed in my mind, before I finally decided to skirt around the crowd and see if I could find another way inside that was hopefully unguarded and not locked. I eventually found a way in, an air vent big enough for me to crawl through with a cover that was held on by two very rusty screws. With a mixture of my sticking powers and a small amount of super strength, it came off quite easily. So I crawled right inside, hoping to find my dad and get out of there, which was when I learned one of the biggest rules in the hero business. Nothing is ever easy. After about 10 minutes of crawling through the very, very cramped air vent, Izuku had to take a second to pause and catch his breath. Sadly, he ended up with a coughing fit after accidentally inhaling some dust. Once he was able to breathe again, he sighed and whispered, "I really hope this doesn't become a regular thing for me." Yeah, spoiler alert. It did end up becoming a regular thing for me. Seriously, almost every time I've had to sneak into an enemy base or a building that was taken over by villains/criminals, I've had to use the air ducts from either the side of the building or the roof. At the very least, the vents in this building were decently clean, unlike that one vent I had to use in a skyscraper in Nagasaki. But that's a story for another time. Eventually, he managed to come across some smaller air vents that let him see what was going on in the reception area. "Who are these masked guys?" he muttered under his breath. "And why are they doing this?" He heard one of the two say something in Chinese, to which the other replied, and they kept talking. Izuku's Chinese was a little rusty, but he made out a few words like demons, plan, hostages, and a whole bunch of other things that didn't bode well. And then he heard that the main event was happening on the 66th floor, the same floor that his father was on. "I gotta get up there. Fast." As he continued crawling through the vent, he briefly considered calling the police in the hopes that they may get pro-heroes involved, but that plan was immediately squashed when he saw that his phone had no reception. "Gotta find a spot that has signal," he muttered before continuing his crawl. "And make sure these guys don't find me, 'cause I doubt that spider bite made me bulletproof." He eventually came to another grate, this one looking out into one of the elevator shafts, one that was fortunately empty. Carefully as to not make too much noise, he pushed the grate out and crawled out, setting the grate on the bottom of the. He then looked up, noticing that the elevator was fairly high up, at about the 50th floor. Okay, time to start climbing. He used an enhanced jump, which he decided to call his spider jump, to get a head start, easily clearing the first 10 floors and sticking to the on the 11th floor. Despite the situation going on, Izuku couldn't help but smile. Alright, this should help things go quicker. As long as nothing else dash. The words died in his throat when his spider sense went off, and his eyes immediately noticed what looked like a block of C4, but had a strange, ethereal silver glow. His eyes darted down and widened when he saw the same glowing bricks, one on each floor. Goes wrong. Oh no! He pulled out his phone and saw that he had a signal. It was weak, but it should be enough to at least get a text out to his mom, which he promptly typed, "Cybermax under attack. They've got explosives. Need heroes now." Pocketing his phone, he continued climbing up with renewed urgency, occasionally using a spider jump to boost past a couple floors. Worry for his father, and wanting to get away from the potentially deadly explosives that he was very uncomfortably close to. Granted, he didn't see a timer on them, so he knew they wouldn't just automatically go off. But with his limited knowledge of explosives, he knew that they were probably on a remote detonator, and he had no way of knowing if the demons, he figured that's what they called themselves, were about to make everything go kaboom. He seriously hoped they weren't planning on doing that anytime soon. He was also hoping that his mom wasted no time in getting help before things went from bad to worse. Izuku Midoriya was doing her best not to panic as she told the officer in charge about the text her son had sent. It was a mother's worst nightmare, knowing that her son was currently inside a locked building with a bunch of crazy people armed with guns. The explosives were just the icing on an already terrifying cake. Fortunately, the officer in charge, a Captain Stacy if she remembered correctly, was quick to act. I want every available SWAT team here ASAP. I need bomb squad too. Possible explosives dash. Inko's phone dinged, and she saw another text, this time with a picture. Her eyes widened when she saw it, and she immediately got the captain's attention and showed it to him. His own eyes widened before he said, "Scratch that, we have visual confirmation from a civilian on the inside. I need bomb squad now." Once he ended the call, Inko asked, "Aren't there any pro heroes who can help?" The captain sighed. "I wish, but any of the pros who would be useful are either off duty or too far away to help." But then his phone buzzed as a notification went off, and he smiled. "But looks like we caught a lucky break. There's one pro hero who's available and perfectly suited for this kind of situation." Relief filled Inko, and she asked, "How soon until he gets here?" Captain Stacy smiled. "As fast as he can fly. I'd say about 5 minutes." Izuku managed to crawl all the way up to the 45th floor before he ran into his first problem. The problem being that the elevator started up and started moving down towards him. Thinking quickly, he got to the doors that lead onto the floor and slid his fingers into the groove between them and managed to pry them open enough for him to quickly slip through. Had he been a moment later, the elevator would have probably crushed his leg, if not completely cut it off. Getting back up and dusting himself off, he sighed. "Least I can walk now." Looking at a nearby sign, he read 45th floor. "Okay, that's not too bad. If I can get to the stairs without running into Dash." At that moment, he got the bad feeling on his neck, and he heard footsteps coming in his direction from down the hall and around the corner. Seeing that there wasn't a room to slide into or anything big enough to hide behind in the hall, he did the only thing he could think of. With a short jump, short for him anyway, he jumped up and latched onto the ceiling, pressing himself as flat to it as humanly possible. The footsteps turn out to be two of the demons walking down the hallway, one holding a machine gun, and the other holding what appeared to be a sickle with a long pole that glowed with silvery black light. Now, while Izuku knew that his newly acquired enhanced strength could probably help him in a fight, if he was able to lift up a decent-sized car, he'd more than likely be able to send these guys flying down the hall with a punch or two. Hell, if his super jump enhanced the power of his kicks, he could potentially send them flying to the other side of the city via foot to the chest. The problem? Well, problems. 1. He had no combat experience whatsoever. The guys below him obviously did if their group were able to take over the entire building. 2. He had just gotten his quirk today, and aside from some quickly thrown-together physical tests this morning, he had barely any experience using his quirk. And while he doubted these guys would mind killing him, he didn't want to accidentally kill one of them with his enhanced strength. To be fair, a hero killing a villain wasn't unheard of, but they were very rare cases and tended to be either accidental, the villain in question choosing death over incarceration, or the villain overusing their quirk and killing themselves. And 3. Izuku was fairly certain his new spider quirk didn't make him bulletproof or immune to debladed weapons. And he really didn't want to find out. So instead, he kept himself stuck to the ceiling and mentally chanted, "Please don't look up. Please don't look up. Please don't look up." The demons walked on, apparently not noticing the teenage boy above them. To be fair, it was a fairly tall ceiling, talking amongst themselves. Again, due to Izuku's loose grasp on the Chinese language, he wasn't able to understand the full conversation, but he was able to pick a few bits and pieces. None of it was good, primarily parts like shoot on sight and no survivors. Real cheery stuff. Fortunately, the two of them continued walking down the hall, eventually turning a corner and walking out of sight, their footsteps growing more faint until he couldn't hear them anymore. Once he felt it was safe, Izuku dropped down onto the floor, breathing a sigh of relief. That was way too close. Really hope I don't have any more close calls. It was only now that Izuku was in the building and trying to get to his father that he realized how crazily stupid he was being. Even if he did manage to get to the 66th floor and to his father, what the hell was he going to be able to do? He was 15 years old and had had his quirk for less than 24 hours. These guys had guns and weapons and no doubt had far more experience using their quirks than he did. This was a situation for pro heroes, ones who had far more training and experience than he did. So, why are my legs still moving me forward so I can find my father? Deciding to bury those thoughts and focus on not getting killed by the guys with demon masks, Izuku kept moving towards the stairs, checking around every corner, listening carefully for any footsteps, and paying close attention for that warning sense of his. What did Dad call it? Oh, spider sense. Let's go with that. He was forced to hide multiple times along the way, usually by ducking into an empty room or jumping up to the ceiling. He was really thankful for the spider sense in this situation, as odds were without it he probably would have been caught by these guys. Eventually, he made it to the stairwell, thankfully not hearing any footsteps or voices above him. He took off running, seemingly flying up each flight of stairs, desperately hoping that his father was still alive, and also hoping that they'd eventually get some pro heroes and soon to take care of this. His luck managed to hold out, and he made it to the 66th floor, which mostly consisted of large, spacious personal offices for the board of directors. Said offices all had at least 2 or 3 glass walls, and to Izuku's right was a row of windows that were covered by security shutters. Sadly, there also weren't a lot of objects to hide behind, and with the glass walls it would be pretty easy to see him coming. Plus, from what he could see, none of the air vents looked big enough for him to crawl through. And from his position behind a nearby mail cart, Izuku could make out one more demon patrolling outside the room the board meetings were usually held. Okay, he whispered. How the hell do I get past that guy? He looked around for something to use, not bothering with the mail cart since that would make too much noise. The only thing he found that could possibly be useful was an empty cardboard box that he might be able to fit in if he crouched down real low. Picking up the box and hiding under it, after making sure one of the handle holes was open all the way so he could see, Izuku muttered, if it worked for Solid Snake, hopefully it'll work for me. It didn't work. It did not work. 1. Though on the plus side, he did manage to find his father, as well as the 15 members of the board of directors. On the downside, however, he was now stuck in a room with the demons, and all of them were probably debating on whether or not they should use their machine guns on them. Hisashi's eyes were filled to the brim with fear as he watched his son be forcefully pushed into the room. The only thing stopping him from rushing to check on him was that the demons had said if anyone moved, they'd open fire. One of the demons, the leader he guessed, glared down at Izuku behind his mask and in English said, "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." Izuku looked up at him and smiled, before replying, "I'd probably go with both." The lead demon chuckled, before lashing out and slugging him in the face. Smart butt. He motioned to 2 of his other demons, and they escorted Izuku over to the group, coincidentally dropping him right next to his father. "Don't try anything stupid," one of them muttered. Once they walked away, Hisashi whispered to Izuku, "What the hell are you doing here?" Izuku winced. "Long story, but I felt that you were in danger, and, well, my legs just moved on their own." You realize how crazy that sounds, right? We're on the 66th floor of a building being held hostage by a bunch of men wearing silly masks. I think that's just the slightest bit more crazy than my legs apparently having a mind of their own. Hisashi looked like he was about to argue, but then stopped. Fair point. The lead demon pulled out a phone and started talking in Chinese. "Sorry for the interruption, sir. We had a disturbance." "What kind of disturbance?" "Some stupid kid somehow managed to get up here without getting caught. We got him with the rest of the hostages." "Good to know. But this changes nothing. Have they met your demands?" "No," his boss replied with barely concealed venom in his voice. "They're trying to stall us. And unfortunately, they're sending in a pro hero to deal with the situation, and he's on his way. DM in it." "What should we do?" There was silence for a minute, until his boss said, "Scorch the earth." The demon was silent for a moment, before he asked, "Even the child?" "No survivors. Show them the power and conviction of the inner demons." His eyes flashed silver, and he replied, "Yes, sir." Hanging up, he turned to the other demons. "Scorch the earth." They all nodded, before taking the hostages and lining them up against the far wall opposite the shuttered windows. The demons then took up positions in front of the hostages, all of whom looked even more scared now when they realized they were about to be executed by a firing squad. "Your boss refuses to give in to our demands, so now you all will pay the price." He aimed the gun at someone's head, the rest of the demons following suit, when suddenly the security shutters began retracting. One of the demons asked, "What's going on?" Their leader was about to respond, when suddenly there was the wonderful sound of breaking glass and a loud thud. All of the demons turned towards the sound, as did the hostages, and Izuku's eyes widened. Because there was a man standing a little over 6 feet tall, clad in a metal armor with glowing lenses over his eyes and a glowing full circle upon his breastplate. The armor itself was mostly scarlet red, but with gold over the face, biceps, and thighs. Izuku recognized him in an instant. "That's Tony Stark, the technology hero. Iron Man. Name, Tony Stark. Superhero name, Iron Man. Quirk, technopathy. Tony is able to interface with various technology through his thoughts alone, provided the tech in question is capable of receiving a wireless signal. He combines this with his vast fortune and genius IQ to create high-tech suits of armor that he uses for hero work. He's claimed the #2 American Pro Hero spot, right between the mighty Thor at #3 and Captain America at #1. 3. If Iron Man could smile, he would. Well, my reputation precedes me." Looking at the lead demon, he said, "Don't bother trying to threaten me with the hostages you got downstairs. A friend of mine already took care of your guys and got them out of there." Once the demon swore, he added, the palms of his gauntlets started glowing. "Who wants to go down first?" One of the demons yelled something in Chinese and aimed his gun, but before he could pull the trigger, a blast of energy shot out of Iron Man's palm, nailing the gun and destroying it. A secondary blast followed, nailing the demon in the chest and sending him flying into the far wall. Once he hit the floor, he didn't get back up. Next, one of the demons holding a sickle tried to rush him and slice him, but all that earned him was an energy blast to the chest and getting knocked out like his friend. Anyone else? The rest of the demons immediately opened fire with their guns, silver-white/black bullets flying and a majority of them hitting him. However, all they did was simply bounce off the armor like they were made of RBB, doing no damage save for scratching a bit of the paint. Once their clips were empty, he said, "My turn." Before they could move, a panel on each shoulder moved to reveal hidden flechette launchers and immediately fired. Each of the projectiles homed in on a target, striking them and delivering a sedative that immediately put their targets to sleep. The launchers retracted, and Iron Man looked at the last demon standing, the leader. And then there was one. The leader pulled out a detonator, holding his finger right over the trigger. "Don't come any closer. I push this button, and the bombs will detonate and bring the entire building down." Iron Man seemed to be considering this, his glowing gauntlets growing dim, but then he said, "Oh yeah, thanks for making this easier." Making what dash? The words died in the demon's mouth as the detonator in his hand suddenly sparked before emitting a loud pop sound, a thin trail of smoke rising through the cracks. "No, impossible." And that was the last thing he said before Iron Man shot forward and nailed him in the face with a right cross, his armor's strength enhancement sending the poor sap flying through the wall and into the hallway. Once he didn't get back up, Iron Man said, "And we're done." Looking at everyone, he asked, "I take it your board meetings are nowhere near this exciting?" They all shook their heads, except for Izuku, who was too busy staring at Iron Man in awe. "I just got saved by a pro hero. This is awesome. Nothing could possibly ruin." Sadly, it was at that moment that his spider sense went off, and he turned to the source of the danger. One of the demons had apparently managed to fight off the sedative enough to grab his pistol, and was now aiming it rather shakily at Izuku, pulling the trigger. The next few seconds, he wasn't sure what happened. One moment he was standing and about to be shot, The next, he felt something rather forcefully pushing him out of the way, hearing a loud bang, and then suddenly he was on the floor. The sudden shock kept him from moving, barely registering the sound of Iron Man firing off another energy blast and knocking the demon out for good. Once he regained his bearings, he got back up and quickly checked himself over, but found that he wasn't bleeding nor in pain. Confused, he got looked back to where he had been standing when the man fired, and what he saw made his heart stop and his BLD run cold. Lying on the ground was a man in his mid-30s, with messy curly jet-black hair and 4 freckles on each cheek. Izuku knew that had the man been facing him and his eyes had been opened, then he would have seen 2 bright sky-blue eyes. How did he know that? Because that man was his father, and now he was lying on the floor dead, having taken the bullet that had been meant to kill Izuku. A cold numbness spread through Izuku's very being as the realization hit him, and he fell to his knees when he could no longer stand. He crawled over to his father, ignoring the cries of everyone else, grabbing his father and begging, screaming for him to wake up. But it was no use. On June 21st, 2019, Hisashi Midoriya passed away from a gunshot wound to the chest in an effort to save his son from a shooter. I don't know what was worse, seeing my father lying lifeless on the floor of that meeting room, or having to tell my mother that he was gone. Actually, no, I do know what was worse, seeing my mother burst into tears after I told her. I don't really remember most of what happened afterwards, most of it blurring together like when you make a Blu-ray player fast forward as fast as it can go and all of the images start. Sorry, I'm getting off track. It's just trying to remember this day is always hard for me, even after all the visits to the trauma counselor. And trust me, there were many. Anyway, after we got down from the building and gave our statements to the police, Iron Man flew down to talk to me and taught me a very valuable lesson. It wasn't your fault, kid. Izuku stared up at the pro hero, a bit shocked at the statement from the technology hero. "Yes, sir. How is it not my fault?" he uttered. "My father died because I wasn't fast enough. Because I am human just like everyone else," the hero said, cutting him off. "You couldn't have known that the one guy was going to fight off my sedative enough to pull a gun and pull the trigger. I didn't even know, and I make all this stuff." He gestured to his armor for emphasis. He didn't respond, just staring at the paramedics as they loaded the body bag, holding his father onto the ambulance. Once the doors closed, he said, "It's just maybe if I wasn't there, Let me stop you right there, kid. If you hold on a sec." To Izuku's surprise, the armor made several clicking sounds before the front of it opened up to reveal Tony Stark, who promptly stepped out. The man himself was roughly 6'1", with brown hair and brown eyes. He was dressed in a pair of blue jeans that had several grease and oil stains, and an old t-shirt for the band AC/DC. "Sorry, I needed to get out of the armor for a bit." He smirked at Izuku's slightly shocked expression and said, "Yeah, I know, you probably figured I'd be taller." "And no," Izuku quickly exclaimed. "Though I will admit, it is kind of weird seeing you in regular clothes instead of those fancy suits you're usually wearing at your company's expos." "No offense." Tony chuckled. "None taken. I get that a lot from people who don't know me too well." His face became somber, and he said, "Kid, we didn't know what was going on aside from cell phone footage from the people outside. Until you got in, we didn't know about the armed gunmen, we didn't know about the hostages, and we certainly didn't know about those bombs." Sitting down next to Izuku, he continued, "I analyzed the bombs once the bomb squad got them out of the elevator. If those things had detonated, the whole building would have been destabilized and potentially collapsed, and even more people would have been killed. While what you did was a bit reckless, you ended up saving hundreds of people." "It should have been hundreds and one," he muttered dejectedly. Don't get him wrong, he understood what Tony was saying. If he hadn't acted, if he hadn't tried to get into the building and save his father, then there'd be a lot more body bags and a lot more grieving families. The fact that that wasn't what happened would be something to be proud of. But he couldn't seem to see past the fact that his father was dead. And it was all because he had died saving him. Tony placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "I know how you feel. Trust me." Once he saw he had Izuku's attention, he continued, "Everyone likes to think that pro-heroes like me are invincible. That because we're so good at our jobs, we never fail at anything we do. We never lose to villains. And whenever we try to save people, we manage to save everyone. But the truth is, that's the biggest lie in history. We're not gods. We're just as human as everyone else. That means we've failed just as much. I've got a whole warehouse filled with failed prototypes and inventions that I just couldn't get to work right. I've lost plenty of fights to villains who had quirks or tech that utterly wrecked my armors, and subsequently had my butt saved by other heroes more times than my ego would like to admit. He sighed. And trust me, there's been plenty of times where I wasn't able to save someone. Sometimes a lot of someone's. Izuku just sat there processing this. Finally, he asked, "You think All Might was never able to save someone?" Tony nodded. "Kid, I'd bet half of my company's stock that there's plenty of people he wasn't able to save." He smiled and continued, "But what sets a hero apart from everyone else is that even if we fail, even if we get our asses knocked down to the ground, we always find a way to get back up and keep going." Finally managing to smile, Izuku replied, "That sounds like something All Might would say." "It should be. He actually told me that." Seeing the look of surprise on his face, Tony replied, "True story. He and I actually worked a case together when he was studying here. He actually gave me the idea for one of my armors." "Huh. Actually, I remember reading something like that. But your armor was silver back then." "That was my Mark II. This one here dash," he pointed to his red and gold one, "is Mark 13. Much lighter and with much more equipment." "I noticed." Izuku finally said, "So what you're saying is, I can't save everyone." Tony nodded. "Trust me, that's something all heroes have to learn at some point." He looked off into the distance, seemingly lost in memory. "We all learned it the hard way, the day that portal was opened in the sky." Izuku nodded, knowing what he was talking about. Back in the year 2012, when Izuku was only 8 years old, a gigantic blue portal had opened above New York City. A portal that allowed a massive force of alien creatures that immediately went on the attack, raining lasers and leveling buildings. Izuku remembered seeing the carnage, looking in shock and horror at what looked like a science fiction movie come to life. Buildings were leveled, people were screaming in panic, all hope seemed lost. Until they came, the top 6 American pro heroes. The super soldier hero, Captain America. The technology hero, Iron Man. The thunder hero, the mighty Thor. Commonly called the mighty Thor by the news people. The raging hero, the Incredible Hulk. The femme fatale heroine, Black Widow. And the archery hero, Hawkeye. The 6 of them had worked together to fight back and save New York, managing to win despite the immense odds. The aliens were either destroyed or sent packing, and the portal had closed, never to be opened again. But Izuku remembered hearing the casualty list on international news. Over 500 people killed, an additional 1,000 more injured, plenty of homes and buildings destroyed and or heavily damaged. The giant flying alien centipedes smashing through buildings didn't help matters. Understanding what he meant, Izuku said, "I'm so sorry." "Don't be." Jolted back to the present, he continued, "We can't save everyone, but that doesn't mean we won't try. Our job is to save as many people as we can, and make sure that villains like those men get brought to justice." Smiling at Izuku, he added, "Best advice I can give you is to remember the ones you couldn't save, but focus on the ones you still can." Izuku nodded. "I'll try." Seeing Tony breathe a sigh of relief, he asked, "You're not really good with these kinds of talks, are you?" He chuckled. "Yeah. Truth be told, Cap's kind of the one to make all the inspirational speeches." They both laughed at that, and Izuku started to feel at least a little better. Finally, Izuku asked, "Do you really think I can be a hero?" Tony looked at him in surprise, before smiling and saying, "Honestly, after what you did today, I'd say you're already a hero. Now you just need a license and a costume." Izuku's heart swelled, and a few tears fell from his eyes. Thank you. Don't mention it." Getting up and back into his armor, Tony said, "You're a good kid. Sorry I didn't catch your name." "Oh, my name's Izuku Midoriya, sir." "Thanks. You're a good kid, Izuku. And I get the feeling you're going to be an even greater hero." His helmet closed around his head, the lens lighting up. "Who knows? Maybe one day you might even be greater than All Might." Firing up his thrusters, he said, "See you around, Izuku." With that, he flew off, leaving Izuku with a lot to think about. And to be honest, he was feeling a lot better than earlier. Don't get the wrong idea, I wasn't completely 100% okay after that talk. It would take a few more weeks, some therapist visits, and quite a few sleepless/nightmare-filled nights before I was anywhere close. It took even longer for my mother. She still sheds some tears when she walks past a picture of her and Dad. Anyway, a few days later after meeting with several of the board members they could give their condolences and thank me, which felt very hollow, as most of them probably didn't even really know my father. Or me for that matter. We flew back home to Japan. Mom was eager to be home, and me. I just felt that getting away from the place it happened might do me some good, something Mom wholeheartedly agreed with. The funeral was a few days after we got back, Dad's body taking a little longer to be flown home. Not a lot of people showed up, mostly just our neighbors and the few people who knew him from school or his work. He wouldn't have minded. He'd just feel honored that anyone besides me and Mom showed up. The rest of the summer passed by without much incident. I went to see a therapist that wasn't too expensive and eventually managed to get some sleep without nightmares. I didn't even need sleeping pills anymore. Granted, I wasn't at full 100%, but I was still pretty close, maybe at 90%. Thus, I began the second term of ninth grade at Alder Junior High. I was fully expecting to be set upon by my former best friend turned bully Katsuki Bakugo and his two lackeys the moment I set foot in the school. What happened instead was something I never saw coming. "Hey, DKU." Izuku sighed, turning away from his locker and expecting to see Bakugo, but all he saw were Bakugo's two lackeys, Kohei and Masashi. And judging by the evil smiles on their faces, neither of them looked like they were coming to just say hi and ask how his summer was. He sighed, somewhat thankful that Bakugo wasn't there. "Look, guys, I am really not in the mood for dash. Heard your pops bit the dust over the summer. Wow, really not pulling your punches?" Kohei Izuku mentally grumbled. "Yes, he did. Why do you ask?" "Well, the two of us are wondering," Masashi said. "Did your pops really take that bullet to save you, Dash?" Izuku clenched his fists. "Please tell me you guys aren't seriously going to. Or did he take it so that he wouldn't have to live with the shame of his only child being a quirkless loser?" Kohei finished before the two of them cackled like two hyenas. A few tears fell from Izuku's eyes at that statement, and his fists were now clenched so hard that his fingernails were digging into his palms and drawing BLD. "My father is dead. He was murdered by some, but with a gun. Right in front of me." His eyes snapped open into a horrifying death glare that made the two assholes flinch for a second, before he pulled back his fist. "And you assholes." But before Izuku could unleash his fury upon them, there was a loud boom, and the two of them were blasted into the lockers in front of Izuku by a small, yet powerful explosion. The one behind the explosion was none other than Katsuki Bakugo, in all of his red-eyed, spiky ashen-blonde-haired glory. And boy oh boy, did he look pissed. At Kohei and Masashi, and not at Izuku. "You assholes think this is some kind of a joke." Grabbing both of them by the collars of their uniform, he growled, "You BSTRDS are seriously going to pick on a guy who just lost his father, and actually insinuate that it was because of him? What kind of assholes are you? What do you care?" Masashi replied, "You used to pick on him just as much as we did. I never pulled this kind of shitty but stunt. UF BSTRD," he growled. He slammed both of them against the lockers again and said, "You ever mess with him again, and I'll make UF heirs curse your moms for giving BRTH to you." He then let them go, daring them to make a move. "Now get lost." They immediately ran off, both of them cursing at Bakugo for his actions. Once they're out of sight, Bakugo looked at Izuku, who had just been watching the whole thing go down with a mix of awe and disbelief. Finding his voice, he said, "Thank you, Kachin." Bakugo scoffed. "Whatever." His gaze softened and he asked, "You doing okay?" He nodded with a slight smile. "Yeah. Took a summer's worth of therapy, but I managed to finally leave the apartment." They both chuckled at that. Izuku then said, "You know, you're probably going to get detention for that." He shrugged. "Meh. Wouldn't be the first time." Taking another look at Izuku, he asked, "You join a gym or something? You're looking like you put on some muscle." "Long story. I'll tell you after school." With that, the two of them headed off to class. "Yeah, I was as shocked as you guys are. My former best friend turned bully was now actually being my friend again. Sort of. But truth be told, I was thankful. Truth be told, I miss being friends with him. Granted, we weren't best friends right off the bat. That didn't happen until after school that day. So, your father's science experiment gave you superpowers, Bakugo asked in disbelief. It was after school, and the two of them were heading home, Izuku explaining what happened over in New York City. Everything from the spider bite all the way to his talk with Iron Man. He nodded. Yeah. I went to bed that night the same skinny Deku as always. I woke up the next morning stuck to the ceiling with all of this. He gestured to his muscles for emphasis. Bakugo laughed. Only you, Deku, could get lucky enough for something like that to happen. I wouldn't call myself lucky, he replied. The same day I got my quirk, I ended up losing my dad. Not exactly what I'd call an equivalent exchange. 2. He nodded. Yeah, that sucks. Deciding to change the subject, Bakugo asked, so, what all can you do? Aside from sticking to surfaces like a spider, I've got enhanced strength reflexes because it was a jumping spider. I've got a super jump, and I have the spider sense. No webs? Izuku shook his head. No webs, which is probably a good thing, since considering where real spiders make their webs. They both cringed at that. Definitely a good thing. As they continued walking, they passed a building that was scheduled for demolition when Izuku's spider sense flared. He stopped, which got Bakugo's attention. What the hell are you stopping for, Deku? The flare was getting stronger, and Izuku immediately tackled Bakugo to the ground, and not a moment too soon. Because the moment they touched the ground, the front of the building exploded in a massive red and orange fireball, sending burning shards of wood, glass, and metal everywhere. Because they were on the ground, they missed the majority of the explosion, though they both still felt the heat from their positions. Sorry, Kachin, Izuku explained as he got up to his feet. My spider sense was going crazy. Nodding, Bakugo replied, it's fine. But what the hell did dash? Whatever he was about to say was drowned out by a demonic-sounding cackle, drawing their attention to the burning building. And what they saw made their blood freeze in their veins. Walking out of the blaze was a nightmarish abomination that stood well over 6 feet tall, with bulging muscles that seemed to barely be held by burnt orange skin. His head resembled that of a goblin, with a pointed nose and pointed ears. His eyes were fields of dark red that seemed to lack any pupils or sclera, and the only clothes he wore were a pair of incredibly torn blue jeans that were just barely holding onto his frame. But most unnerving was his smile, a Joker-esque grin that was filled with shark-like teeth. The beast cackled again, before looking at Izuku and Bakugo. My first victims. Crimson-red fire surrounded its hands, and he flashed them that sinister grin. Try not to burn too quickly. Needless to say, there was one night Bakugo and I were never going to forget. Not just because we were attacked by a monster that threw fire around like a villainous endeavor, but also because it's where we finally met one of the world's greatest heroes face to face. Izuku could feel the heat from the crimson flames just mere inches from his back as he ducked behind a pile of I-beams. Bakugo himself had taken cover behind a cement truck, making sure to stay away from the engine. Once the fire died down, he looked at Izuku and shouted, I still say we should have stayed and fought this BSTRD. In a public space where he could potentially incinerate innocent civilians, Izuku shouted in reply. Not the smartest move. At least here we don't have to worry about too much collateral damage. Fair enough. Any ideas? Poking his head around the corner of his hiding spot to look at their adversary, noticing something odd. He's obviously super strong with pyrokinetic abilities. So a discount endeavor? Yeah, if he and a goblin had a baby. But his fire control is nowhere near as good. In fact, looking closer at the goblin monster, he noticed black patches of skin on his hands. He's burning his own hands by using his flames. Getting a look himself, Bakugo nodded. But then he frowned. But if that happens, why is he just slinging fire around like an idiot? Izuku was about to reply when his spider sense flared, and he jumped out of the way, and not a moment too soon as their attacker had jumped into the air and smashed his fist down right where Izuku had been hiding, cracking the pavement where his large fist struck. He looked at Izuku with a sadistic grin. Ah, there you are. A fireball formed in his hand, and he added a nice try, child. But none escaped the hobgoblin. Just before he could throw it, there was a loud shout of "Dai!" and a loud boom. The one who shouted was Bakugo, And what had happened was that he had gathered a large amount of the nitroglycerin like sweat his palms secreted in both hands, jumped up and thrown it in Hobgoblin's face before detonating it. The resulting explosion knocked Bakugo back, but also sent the giant monster man into the nearby dump truck, smashing his head right into the fuel tank and denting it. The fireball Hobgoblin created was also sent off course, missing Izuku and flying straight up. Getting his bearings, Izuku asked, "You okay, Bakugo?" He nodded, rubbing his right forearm. "I'll live. But this guy dash." Both of their jaws dropped when they saw the goblin slowly stand back up, rubbing his head and growling. "You've got to be shitting me," Bakugo grumbled. Izuku nodded. The guy's quirk makes him super strong, super tough, and lets him play with fire. Taking him head-on is suicide dash. No SHD, Deku. How do we take him down? Best plan I can come up with for right now is to stay alive and either hope a pro hero shows up or he overuses his fire quirk to the point he can't use his hands anymore. Or both. Doesn't sound too hard. Before either of them could move, the hobgoblin, with speed belying his large size, shot forward at the two of them. A single punch sent Izuku flying, landing on the ground hard. "Izuku!" Bakugo roared before moving to blast Hobgoblin in the face, only for him to grab Bakugo's arm and for the explosion to narrowly miss him. Seeing Hobgoblin's sadistic grin grow even wider, he muttered, "Oh, F me." Izuku Midoriya was no stranger to pain, but even he had to admit that the gigantic goblin's punch felt like he got hit by a train. Once he blinked out the stars from his vision, he got to his feet, just in time to see the hobgoblin lift Bakugo up by his arm with one hand and grab Bakugo's head with his free hand. "I have to wonder," he said with barely hidden glee. "How much would I have to squeeze to pop your head like a balloon?" "Ah ha 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 ha." Izuku's BLD ran cold at Hobgoblin's words, and at the sight of Bakugo struggling to get himself free, yelling and screaming and swearing. Against his will, his mind immediately flashed back to that day at Cybermax Tower. His father's lifeless body on that boardroom floor. His mother's many tears when that cop broke the news to her. The tombstone with his father's name on it. Most of all, he remembered the feeling of powerlessness, of knowing that despite the fact he now had a quirk, he was still the same. Old. Useless. Deku. And now here he was again, being forced to watch as someone else he cared about was about to die. No. No. Not this time. With a roar, he shot off straight at Hobgoblin like a bullet, using a spider jump to give himself the necessary boost. Clenching his fist tight, he reared back, and as Hobgoblin turned to face Izuku, the green-haired young man threw his fist forward, slamming it into his face with a loud and sickening crack. Izuku felt his hand go numb from the impact, and he could swear he could feel Hobgoblin's jawbones breaking from the combined might of his spider strength and spider jump. But it had the desired effect of forcing the Hobgoblin to release Bakugo, which would be because the punch was so strong that it sent Hobgoblin flying into the nearby crane, with enough force to smash through the cabin in a shower of twisted metal and broken glass. He finally stopped when he crashed into a concrete mixer truck, denting the drum. Helping Bakugo up, Izuku asked, "You okay?" Bakugo nodded. "I'll live. That was pretty stupid, though. I've already lost my dad. I'm not losing anyone else I care about." A flash of something, maybe regret, flashed in Bakugo's eyes, but before he could say anything, the hobgoblin roared and got back up, summoning more fire until his whole body was cloaked in fire. Both of them could see several missing teeth, and part of his jaw looked pretty busted. Still, he somehow managed to scream, "UFBSTRD. I'll incinerate you both and scatter your ashes all over this motherfucking city." Izuku and Bakugo tensed, both of them preparing for another round, only for a loud booming voice, one that everyone there was quite familiar with, to say, "I think not, villain." The newcomer stood at approximately 220 centimeters tall and weighed roughly 255 kilograms of pure muscle. His physique was one that would make any bodybuilder or pro athlete feel inadequate. He wore a plain white t-shirt and beige pants that clung to his frame like a second skin, and plain sneakers that definitely looked like they were struggling to contain his massive form. His golden blonde hair was slicked back, save for his two front bangs that stood up like V-shaped antennas. But the part that stood out the most was his sharp and chiseled face, with icy blue eyes and a wide, confident grin on his face that seemed to shine in the fading twilight. It was him, the #1 Japanese pro hero, the symbol of peace, All Might. "Fear not, boys," he said with a voice that carried no doubt or hesitation as he flashed them both a thumbs up. "For I am here, All Might," Izuku whispered in wonder and awe. Bakugo smiled. Well, this guy's F. Rather than getting fearful or angry at seeing All Might, the hobgoblin instead cackled and said, "Finally, a challenge worthy of my newfound power." All Might looked confused at that, as did Izuku and Bakugo. But none of them had time to comment when Hobgoblin unleashed a powerful stream of fire at him. But to the surprise of no one, by the time the flames reached to where All Might had been standing, he was no longer there. Instead, faster than anyone could blink, he had run right next to Hobgoblin. "Not bad, villain." He quickly slammed his foot into the Hobgoblin's ribs, sending him staggering backwards. "But I've sparred with Endeavor plenty of times back when I was a student at UA. I know plenty of the tricks flame quirk users such as yourself can use." His grin widened, which seemed slightly impossible, and added, "And compared to him, your flames are nothing more than a summer breeze." "Burn!" Izuku and Bakugo mentally snickered. Hobgoblin growled before charging forward and throwing a punch at him. Only instead of dodging it, All Might caught the punch, grabbed his arm, and hurled him over his shoulder, slamming him on the ground hard. The goblin got back up and surrounded his fists in flames before charging at him, but All Might effortlessly dodged his flaming punches. Izuku and Bakugo could hardly believe it. It was awesome enough to see All Might fighting villains and saving people on their TV/computer screens. But to see it in real life, that was something beyond words. "Oh man, he's even cooler in real life," Bakugo muttered. "Yeah," Izuku replied, nodding. Suddenly his spider sense flared, so hard that it felt like his head was going to burst. "Arg, what the hell?" Seeing Bakugo's concern, he said, "My spider sense. But it's so strong. Almost like Dash." He quickly saw what the danger that triggered his spider sense. And he didn't like what he saw. The veins on Hobgoblin's arms were starting to appear, practically glowing a dark blue that stood out against the burnt orange skin. The color was quickly spreading and up his arms and across his chest and back, and it was making his flames change color as well. Seeing this, Bakugo asked, "What the hell's going on with him?" Apparently Hobgoblin noticed as well, because his whole demeanor did a 180 from cackling and malicious to straight-up terrified. No. They said it was stable. They said I wouldn't dash." He groaned, spasming as the blue fire started appearing against his will around his whole body, and the glow started increasing to the point All Might and the boys had to shield their eyes. And realization finally struck Izuku at what was going on. "All Might, get out of there. He's gonna blow." Understanding what he meant, All Might quickly sped over and grabbed the boys by the scruffs of their jackets, before taking off with a mighty leap that took them high above the next building and away from the construction site and the Hobgoblin. And not a moment too soon. With a massive earth-shattering kaboom, the construction disappeared in a massive flash of blue light. A few seconds later, All Might and the boys were buffeted by a shockwave that shattered the nearby windows. Fortunately, All Might managed to keep his grip on the two of them and landed without too much of a fuss. Once he released the boys, he asked, "You two okay?" Dusting himself off, Bakugo said, "I'll live." Izuku nodded and replied, "I'm fine. Thank you, All Might." A thought occurred to him. How did you know we were in trouble?" He smiled. "We got reports of an explosion occurring in the area, followed by cell phone footage of a monster throwing fireballs and chasing two young boys. I was in the area, so I figured I'd investigate." Looking at Midoriya, he finished with, "I arrived just in time to see your impressive punch, young man." Blushing from the compliment, he stuttered, "Well, I didn't want him to kill my best friend, so—" "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Confused, All Might turned around and immediately saw the Hobgoblin, somehow still alive despite his little light show. "How the F is this guy still alive?" Bakugo deadpanned. All Might was about to answer, but noticed something about their adversary. He was barely able to walk at this point, stumbling with each footstep and barely able to keep his balance. His right and left arms were both history, having apparently been destroyed from the elbows down. His skin was now an ashen gray, his eyes dull and listless. But perhaps the most surprising thing about him was that he seemed to be shrinking, rapidly losing his musculature and his face deforming slightly back to a humanoid one. Realizing what was going on, All Might said, "There's no need to fight anymore. If you surrender, we can get you medical attention." The man that was formerly the hobgoblin pathetically shook his head. "No. Point." He wheezed, taking a ragged breath. "I'm already dead." All strength leaving him, he fell forward. And the moment his face touched the pavement, his body burned with blue flames. He didn't explode like last time, but the flames were still pretty hot. Hot enough that by the time they snuffed out, all that was left was an incredibly charred and burned skeleton. The last remnant of the villain formerly known as the Hobgoblin. Gotta tell you guys, it wasn't every day you see something like that. Once the police showed up, we gave our statements, neither of us really getting in trouble since Hobgoblin attacked us without provocation, meaning this was a pretty straightforward case of self-defense. Had we actually initiated the fight or goaded him into attacking us, we'd probably get in a lot of trouble. After that was over, Bakugo and I decided to head home. I told him I'd see him tomorrow at school, and he gave his usual whatever. Yeah, there was a bit more to that, but I'll save that for another time. But before I got home, I had one last run-in with All Might. "I am here." Izuku could only gape at the #1 Japanese pro hero, who had just slid out from around the corner while in a bizarre pose. Crossing the street like a normal person, ignoring how that was clearly not how a normal person would cross the street, Izuku stammered, "Ayo, All Might. Why are you dash?" With a flourish, All Might held up Izuku's backpack, slightly singed but still holding together. "I believe you dropped this back at the construction site." "Oh, thank you, sir." "No problem." "Well, Dash, can I ask you something?" Realizing what he just said, he quickly added, if you're not busy, that is." All Might paused, but then smiled and replied, "Ask away." Izuku sighed, realizing that he wasn't quite ready to unload all of this on his idol. Well, too late to back out now. See, about 2 months ago, he quickly unloaded everything that happened over the summer. Everything from him originally being quirkless to the spider bite to him getting his quirk to when the demons attacked. He had to hold back the tears when he got to when his father was murdered, but he powered on through. Finally, he reached his question. "Even after everything Iron Man told me, part of me still wonders, could I be a hero?" All Might had been silent the whole time, listening intently as Izuku told him everything. He did ask the occasional question, but otherwise he just listened. Once or twice Izuku could swear he saw something in All Might's eyes, specifically when Izuku explained how his father died trying to save him. I guess Tony was right when he said even All Might couldn't save everyone. What was going through your mind when you felt your father was in trouble? Izuku thought about it for a second before replying, "I don't know. I was just worried that something bad could happen to my father, and my legs moved on their own and got me to him. That's really the only way I could explain it." He paused and added, "I mean, it was probably pretty reckless, Dash." He stopped when All Might put a hand on his shoulder. "Young man, what you did was the mark of a true hero." Seeing Izuku's surprised look, he continued, "The greatest of heroes always have one thing in common. Whenever there was someone in trouble in front of them, their legs would move on their own, and they would rush to save said person without a single ounce of hesitation." "Really?" He nodded. "Exactly. It's a trait very few heroes have nowadays, but whenever they have it, it always means one thing, that they are destined to become great heroes." A few tears fell from Izuku's eyes as All Might said the words that he had needed to hear his entire life. "Izuku Midoriya, one day you are going to be an amazing hero." And that was just the beginning. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. When I was 15, I was bitten by a genetically modified spider and gained a quirk. And this is the story of how I became Spider-Man. It's also the story of how I and many of my friends and classmates end up becoming some of Japan's and the world's greatest heroes." A single message appeared on the screen. "So, another failure?" Sitting at his computer, the recipient shook his head before typing his reply. "Not entirely. That man did manage to stay stable far longer than our last 10 subjects, even managing to activate the pyrokinesis quirk the formula was designed to grant. Granted, overuse of it lead to his eventual instability, but still, progress. He waited for a moment before the man on the other side of the chat, his benefactor, and the one who supplied him with the notes for the formula replied, "I suppose we could see it that way. You did manage to retrieve some data from his encounter with All Might, after all. But of course, drones are so commonplace nowadays nobody gives them much thought. Indeed. How soon until you can have a new version of the formula ready?" The man winced, knowing that this question would pop up, just like it had in so many other conversations. Signed, he typed back, "Not sure. I may have some ideas on how to solve the stability issue, but the materials I require aren't as easy to get over here when you're on a meager doctor's salary. Not only that, but the process to create the formula takes time. Trying to rush it in any way will make an already unstable formula even more unstable. And then there's the fact that my lab is really the back room of my office." He left the thread hanging, but eventually he got a reply. "If I were to supply you with the means and materials, how soon could you get me that new version?" Thinking about it for a few minutes, he replied it would take a few months. "Our biggest problem is the formula's instability. Depending on the materials I use, the first dose could either grant the requested quirks or turn our test subjects into a ticking time bomb. Speaking of which, don't worry about test subjects. There's millions of homeless people in the States. Nobody's going to notice if they don't show up at a soup kitchen." The man chuckled. "Too true. But if it all goes according to plan, we should have a working formula ready by the time the start of the new school year." Hearing his phone ring, he quickly typed, "Gotta go. My day. Job's calling. I'll message you when the stuff arrives. Don't disappoint me." "Wouldn't dream of it," he replied, ending the chat. Answering his phone, the man answered, "Hello?" On the other end, a receptionist said, "Doctor, your next patient's ready." "I'll be right there." The man walked out of the hidden room and into his office, closing the door behind him and engaging the electronic lock. After that, he slid the bookcase back into place, leaving no evidence of the hidden room. The man himself was tall and lanky, with pale white skin and close-cropped brown hair and brown eyes. He was dressed in a typical doctor's uniform, lab coat and all, and pinned to the coat was his name tag, identifying him as one Dr. Ken Ketsueki. 1. Detective Naomasa Tsukauchi had seen and heard a lot of weird things over the course of his career, but this one took the cake. So, he just fell over and burst into flames? Across from him was a thin, almost skeletal man with blonde hair and sunken and blue eyes. To anyone else, he'd look like he was horribly anorexic and in severe need of a sandwich, as well as imagining that one good punch would snap his bones like toothpicks. Naomasa was one of the few people privileged enough to know that this man, Toshinori Yagi, was really Japan's #1 pro hero, All Might. The reasoning for him looking like a toothpick was due to a horrendous injury he received roughly 5 years ago, one that he still wouldn't tell Naomasa the full details about. All he knew was that 5 years ago, All Might had fought a very powerful villain and won, but said villain had blasted a good chunk of his stomach and part of his respiratory system. This had the unfortunate effect of limiting his time as All Might to roughly 3 hours a day, give or take, and had him occasionally cough up BLD from time to time, which was gross. Toshinori nodded. "Yeah, right after he went nuclear and almost blew me and the two boys to hell." Naomasa nodded, remembering that from his report. Whatever caused him to detonate blew that construction yard apart. Right now, it's just a smoking crater with some half-melted construction equipment and materials. Set back the company months, if not years. What were they building there again? A department store. Oh, the tragedy. Looking at the reports in front of him, he asked the medical examiner find anything useful? The fingertips were pretty badly burnt even before his death burns, but you already knew that from when he was using his flames. Most of what was left of him was pretty badly burnt, but they were able to scrape enough cells off of his bones to get a positive ID. That piqued his interest. And who was the man before he became a human barbecue? Naomasa pulled out the coroner's report and handed it to Toshinori. Clipped to the report was a picture of a man with black eyes and thinning black hair. Moyasu, the self-proclaimed emissary of fire, Naomasa read aloud. 30 years old, high school dropout, has the most counts of arson out of any criminal in recent years. Toshinori remembered him. The man apparently had a quirk that allowed him to transform his hands into fire. He combined this with various materials like oil, gasoline, basically anything that could catch on fire, and went on a burning spree. How he managed to evade the police and the pro-heroes was unknown, but for 3 months he set fire to multiple buildings ranging from small homes to large apartment buildings. When they finally managed to capture him, 2 officers had to go to the hospital to get treated for third-degree burns, and they quickly found that Moyasu was completely and utterly insane, spouting off about how the fire would reveal the truest nature of whatever it touched and all sorts of babble like that. Honestly, All Might wasn't there, but from what he heard, the guy was a total head case. Even still, one thing stood out to Japan's #1 pro hero. He wasn't able to do any of this stuff before. Naomasa nodded. That's what's got some of my guys confused. Moyas's quirk only gave him the ability to transform his hands into fire. He was never able to shoot it out like Endeavor or physically transform into that thing. 1,000 different scenarios bounced around in Toshinori's head for how this could have happened, most of which were unlikely. Only 2 really sounded plausible, and they all stemmed from the same thought. Someone gave him those additional quirks. The detective sighed. Yeah, we figured that much. But to be honest, this doesn't sound like him. Toshinori nodded. Unless he intentionally wanted them to self-destruct, and even then it would usually be because they were about to be captured or they were no longer useful to him. Suicide bomber? He shook his head. Not his style, and not worth transforming him into that. Goblin. So this transformation was meant to be an enhancement, along with the fire shot ability. And it couldn't be him, because the work he did was nowhere near this sloppy. None of his previous works ever self-destructed like this. Naomasa didn't have a lot of experience with that man's previous works, but he trusted Toshinori's judgment on that. So what caused his new quirks? Well, before he exploded, he yelled that they had told him he was stable. Toshinori replied. They could mean the people who gave him those quirks. He nodded. More than likely, meaning we're either dealing with anywhere from a few people to a large group of them. But the IT could mean some sort of machine, or a drag. A drag that can give quirks, Toshinori asked. I mean, I know there's drags that can enhance quirks, but a drag that can give quirks? Is that even possible? We live in a world where you can bulk up to the point you can smash buildings with a single punch. An elite high school is run by a literal animal, and almost everyone in the world has a superpower of some sort. I'm pretty sure anything is possible at this point. He couldn't argue with that point, partially because his phone buzzed because he got a text. Reading it, he smirked. Well, I need to get going. Training your successor? Toshinori nodded with a smile. I get the feeling she's going to be an even greater bearer of one for all than I was. What's she going to do? Move mountains? Chuckling as he got up, Toshinori said, more like sending those mountains into orbit. 2. School was over for the day, and after getting his homework done in record time, Izuku decided to get started on a new project. One that would no doubt come in very handy for his career as a pro hero. He looked over his notes, tapping his pencil on his desk while he mumbled, I think I figured out the basis for the formula. Now all I need is a DLVRY system. I can't imagine putting holsters on my belt, so guns are out. Maybe something mounted on my wrists? Yeah, that should work. But I don't want them to be too big or too clunky, so dash. Deku. Looking out his room's window, he saw Bakugo waiting outside, all the way down on the ground floor. Did you forget what I told you last night? He yelled. I didn't forget. I mean, how could I? After all, it's not every day someone as headstrong, stubborn, and prideful as Bakugo Katsuki gives you an apology. Last night, after Izuku and Bakugo gave their statements to the police officers, who thanked them for the details and for Izuku's observations of Hobgoblin's abilities, the 2 of them headed home. Both of them were exhausted from the night's events and ready to just unwind for the night. As they walked, Izuku couldn't help but notice that Bakugo was being uncharacteristically quiet. Concerned, Izuku asked, Hey, you okay, Kachin? Seemingly jolted back to reality, Bakugo nodded. Yeah, just thanks for saving my butt back there. Taken by surprise, he fumbled for a bit before saying, You're welcome. But what did you think I was going to do? Just let the guy kill you. Bakugo was silent for a few minutes, and Izuku was honestly starting to get worried. Finally said, No, you wouldn't. But that does bring up something I've been meaning to ask you. And that is, I've been nothing but in butt to you since it was discovered you were quirkless. I've taunted you, beat your butt, made fun of your dreams. And yet, you're Dash. Not angry at you for doing all of that, or holding a serious grudge against you for the many years you've been a complete PP, Izuku surmised. Bakugo nodded, a bit surprised since Izuku wasn't really one to swear. I guess I'm just wondering, why are you being so nice to me? Izuku pondered that for a moment. Truth be told, he always imagined what would happen if he and Bakugo ever became best friends again like they used to be. But much like his original dream of being a quirkless hero, he never figured it would happen. So he really didn't know what to say right off the bat. But eventually he figured it out. Honestly, I never blamed you for that. It wasn't your fault that you were born with a powerful and rare quirk, and I wasn't. That's just pretty much how our society's been built up. Those with good or amazing quirks like yours get praised and held up high, while people with lesser quirks or who are unfortunate enough to be quirkless like I was tend to, get the Bakugo supplied. Yeah. So if anything, you were just a product of our society. But even with all that said, you are the closest thing to a brother I've ever had. And just because you stopped being my friend for a time, doesn't mean I stopped being yours. 2. Bakugo digested that for a moment, before finally saying, that is some of the cheesiest SHD I've ever heard. Izuku scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Yeah, sorry, it was the best I could think of, but I get it. Kinda. And a look of distress crossed his face, before he finally managed to spit out, I'm sorry. He couldn't help but smirk at that. That must have really hurt. More than you know. Once they reached the point where they'd go their separate paths, he asked, you still planning on getting into UA? Izuku rolled his eyes. This is me we're talking about, Bakugo. Bakugo chuckled. Yeah. You up for doing some training after school tomorrow? He nodded. Of course. I still need to figure out some of the things about my powers, and try and get used to my new strength. Seeing Bakugo's confused look, he said, I broke about 5 pencils today because my concentration slipped, and I ended up gripping it too hard. Trying to work on that, because the last thing I want to do is try and save someone and end up breaking their arm. Or worse. Yeah, that was a nasty scenario. Alright then, since you're probably going to need all the help you can get, how about I help train you for the entrance exam? Izuku smiled. That sounds great. Thanks. Don't thank me yet, Bakugo said with an absolutely sadistic grin. Since we're pretty much playing catch-up for you, get ready for a crash course in training from Hell 101. Despite that, Izuku smirked and sarcastically replied, Oh no, please have mercy. They both laughed at that as they went their separate ways. See you after school, Kachin. Whatever, Deku. So yeah, Bakugo and I were cool now. And he wasn't kidding about putting me through training from hell. Back to the present. Come on, DKU. My grandma can lift more than that. After Izuku had changed into his green tracksuit and bid his mother goodbye, he had ran off after Bakugo, quite literally, for roughly 10 miles. And that was just the warm-up. Bakugo eventually lead him to his secret training spot that not even his 2 former cronies knew about. To Izuku's surprise, it was actually an old junkyard called Raxus. At one point in time, it was pretty big and booming, but then it had gone bankrupt and been quickly forgotten by everyone. But they left plenty of stuff to work with, and as Bakugo put it, it's far enough from the city that no one can see us and or hear us. So we can cut loose a little. Cut loose translated into quite a few things. Like bench pressing some of the heavier pieces of junk ranging from old refrigerators, to car and truck engines, to right now with a refrigerator with 2 truck engines inside. Real heavy ones. They did that for about 30 minutes. Once that was over, they moved to different activities to train Izuku and his other abilities. One of them was setting up an obstacle course using cables, pieces of junk of various size and weight, and Bakugo himself, who had a mean pitching arm. The idea was for Izuku to run through and not get hit once to test his reflexes, speed, and agility while also getting in a bit of spider sense training. He went through it about 3 times, with the last one being his best, 10 minutes and 45 seconds, and only got hit 3 times. They took a break after that last one, Izuku being smart enough to fill his backpack with some water bottles. As they sat down, Izuku explained to Bakugo about his new project. Shouldn't you just wait until we get into UA and have the support department build them? Bakugo asked. Izuku shook his head. Not really. I want to be sure that they work before I get to UA. Not exactly a good idea to give them stuff that hypothetically could work, only for them to either fail or not work the way you intended on your first training exercise. Fair point. And now that I think about it, Izuku said while looking around the junkyard, I think we might be able to find what I need to make these right here. Bakugo smirked, downing the rest of his water and breaking out into a grin. Let's go scrap diving after we finish today. 'Cause now it's time for something I've been waiting for. Oh God. What now? Quirkless combat training. Izuku had a feeling he was going to be very sore when he got home that night. I'll say this much. Even without his explosion quirk, Bakugo is still one hell of a fighter. Before that day, I never felt more sore in my life. And that's basically how our training went for the months leading up to the UA entrance exam. When that wasn't going on, we were working on other stuff. Primarily my web shooters, as I decided to call them. I managed to scrounge up the chemicals I figured would be necessary for the web fluid itself from a store in the mall, as well as the equipment necessary for it. It took a few tries and some tweaks to my original formula, and quite a few sticky explosions that took hours to dissolve, but eventually I got a version of the formula that would work. The tensile strength would allow it to hold up some very heavy objects. A single 2-meter strand was able to hold up a large truck engine, while its elasticity would allow it to flex to a certain point without breaking. And considering what I was planning to use it for, I made sure that the webs themselves were biodegradable. Give it about an hour, and they'd dissolve into harmless foam. Then it came time to build the Mark I web shooters themselves. The final design for the prototype was still a bit clunky, but functional. A carousel-loaded system would feed me the next cartridge of web fluid, currently at 6 for each wrist due to cartridge size. I made a note to add a utility belt to my costume to hold extras because odds were I'd need them, and possibly work on cartridge size and storage capacity for the future. The trigger was small and set in the palm of my hand, designed to only fire when I pressed my middle and ring fingers into it. This way I didn't accidentally fire it when I made a fist or grabbed something. A nozzle just above my wrist would shoot the webs as either small shots or thick web lines, with plans in the future to eventually modify them for other firing modes when I got into UA. Last but not least, a small but powerful battery in each web shooter would power the air jets that would propel the web fluid out. And all of this was done with a bunch of machine parts and components Bakugo and I found in a junkyard. Angus MacGyver, eat your heart out. Finally, after the month it took to make the web fluid and the web shooters, on October 13th it was time to test them. Ready with the fire extinguisher, Kachin? Seeing Bakugo nodding while holding the red metal thing, Izuku strapped the web shooter on his right wrist, making sure it was on tight enough it wouldn't slip off, but not enough to cut off circulation. He took aim at the target in front of him and said, "Okay." In 3, 2, 1. He pressed his fingers on the trigger, and it sparked before starting to smoke. Before Izuku could freak out and try and take it off, Bakugo blasted it with the fire extinguisher until the smoke stopped. "Thank you. No problem. Guess that test was a fail. That's what these tests are for," Izuku replied, taking it off and opening it up. "Like my dad once told me, it's better for a hero tech to fail in the workshop than out in the field." Once he replaced the fried components and did a bit of tweaking, he tested it again. This one went better since it didn't fry itself. But it did spray Izuku in the face with several strands of webbing, leading to him cursing and Bakugo laughing his butt off. It was not a fun hour for Izuku waiting for the webs to dissolve. After repairing the cartridge and modifying the nozzle, he tested it again. "Okay, third time's the charm. 3, 2, 1. He pressed his fingers on the trigger and was rewarded with a single web line firing out and nailing the target dead center. He double-tapped the trigger and the line broke, just like he planned for in the design. He then double-tapped the trigger again while aiming, and a single glob of web, which he would later dub the web shot, fired out and nailed the target again. Izuku couldn't help but smile at this. "It works. Guess third time was the charm," Bakugo said with a smirk. Izuku nodded happily. "Yeah. Now, not only do I have the abilities of a spider, but I also have my own webs. Now you just need 8 limbs, fangs, venom sacs dash." He rolled his eyes at that. "Ha! Very funny, Kachin." Still, there was no denying the pride Izuku felt at his accomplishment. But there was still one more thing he wanted to try out. And a few minutes later, he was crouched on top of the arm of the crane that used to hold the electromagnet used to pick up cars. Izuku guessed that from the top to the ground was roughly a 50-foot distance, high enough that Bakugo looked a hell of a lot smaller, though his voice still managed to reach him when he yelled, "You better not screw this up and break your neck. Last thing I want is to tell your MOM you died because you were being stupid." "Can do," he yelled back down, before making sure his feet were firmly adhered to the arm before he stood up. The logical part of his mind was telling him that this was a stupid idea and he was probably going to either injure himself or die. The other part of his mind was telling him this was going to work and would more than likely be how he'd travel around the city once he got his pro hero license, so he might as well get some practice in. And with the other part of his mind winning that argument, he felt himself tilt forward before allowing himself to detach and fall towards the ground. He wasn't able to stop himself from screaming for the first few seconds, but eventually he got a hold of himself and fired a web line at the crane arm. The line nailed and stuck, and Izuku felt the line go taut as he started to swing. The ground was rushing up to meet him, and Izuku prayed that he calculated the math for this right. And he did, as he swung back up into the air with his feet, not even close to touching the ground. Once he hit the top of his swing, he let go, falling a much shorter distance and safely landing on a stack of old junker cars, somewhat breathless from what had just happened. From where he was standing, Bakugo was completely speechless. Holy SHT, that actually worked? Izuku was honestly having the same thoughts, almost in disbelief at what just transpired. Yeah, even he thought it wasn't going to work like that. Eventually, though, he broke into a grin and let out a loud whoa. Toshinori Yagi was surprised when he got to Dagoba Beach that day. It had once been a very appealing beach, a popular spot for first dates, family gatherings, proposals. But then garbage drifted in from the sea, and the less morally inclined decided to dump their own trash along with it since nobody would notice. Now it was but a shadow of its former glory, or at least it had been, until he started training his successor there. Now at least a quarter of the garbage was gone, revealing a few spots of the pristine white sands that had been hidden beneath. Speaking of whom, he spotted said successor practicing with her quirk. A heavy-looking refrigerator was in front of her, but when she touched it and used her quirk, evident by a soft pink glow from her fingertips, the fridge began to rise from the ground. She then pushed it away into the pile that would be taken away that day, deactivating her quirk's effects by pressing her fingertips together. The surprise came from the fact that while his successor wasn't one to not put her all into the training they were doing, usually he got to the beach first and had to wait for her to arrive. But today, she was actually the first one there. Walking over, he said, "You're here early." She turned around and saw him, and replied, "Got to Mizudafu a little early. I'm looking for an apartment for when I get into UA." She blushed and quickly said, "Well, if I get into UA." The girl in front of him was 15 years old, with brown eyes that matched her brown hair, which had two long bangs that framed her face. She was a little short, just slightly above the 5-foot mark, with fair skin that had a perpetual blush on her cheeks. She had a bit of a slender build, wearing an old pink jacket and a pair of black jeans with boots, both of which looked a few years old. The most interesting thing about her was that if one were to look at her hands, they would see a small pad on the fingertips, similar to what you might see on a dog or a cat's paw. Toshinori chuckled, before he suddenly beefed up into his muscle form and put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Fear not, Ochako Uraraka. You'd be a shoe-in for UA, even if I hadn't picked you to be my successor." Looking up at him, she asked, "You really think so?" If it were possible, All Might's smile grew even wider. "But of course, you not only have courage, but you have spirit, and that heart of a true hero." Ochako couldn't help but giggle. "Didn't you tell me the same thing when I asked you if I was really the best pick to be the next holder of your quirk?" All Might chuckled. "Okay, you got me there. But it's true." She smiled. "Thanks." He deflated back to his skinny form, and Toshinori Yagi said no problem. "Now, how about we take a break from this and go for a run?" She nodded, a determined fire burning in her eyes. "Let's go." As they left the beach, they both passed a green-haired, green-eyed boy around Ochako's age, who was jotting something down in his notebook, while wearing what looked like a very big metal bracelet on each wrist. He noticed them as they ran past. Well, Ochako was running while Toshinori was riding on a scooter, and he gave them a small wave. They both waved back before moving on. I meant what I said, Tashinori mused mentally. Young Uraraka, you do have the spirit, courage, and heart to be a great holder of One for All. And hopefully be the end of our training. You'll be more than ready to inherit it. Once they were gone, Izuku wondered aloud, why do I get the feeling those two are going to be important in the future? The rest of the year went by pretty quickly. School, training, working on stuff for when we got into UA I'd say but he said he'd kill me if I didn't get in. I asked what happens if he didn't get in, and he said that he'd kick his own butt. Not that that'll ever happen. The training really paid off. By the time we got to the final month before the entrance exam, my reflexes were a lot better, which combined with my spider sense made me nearly untouchable. I say nearly because the spider sense is mostly geared towards sneak attacks and oncoming danger. If Bakugo is attacking me head-on, unless he tries to sneak an explosion attack on me, my sense won't go off. I got my super strength pretty well handled. I seriously doubted I'd accidentally break anyone's fingers in a handshake anytime soon. Saved me a fortune on pencils, too. Even managed to run the obstacle course in around 5 minutes and didn't get hit once. All that, while I continued to practice and hone my skills with my web shooters. The web swinging was the only thing I hadn't been able to truly test, mainly because there was a world of difference between swinging off a lone crane onto a nearby conveyor belt and swinging through the city high above everything. That would have to wait until I got into UA, and we started doing training in urban environments. Definitely on the checklist. Everything was going smoothly. Things were looking good. So naturally, only a few weeks before the entrance exam, something big, momentous, and terrifying had to happen. Story of my life. And it all started when I found a little girl in an alley. Izuku shivered a little as he walked down the street. Why does winter always have to be so cold? He grumbled. It was late January, a few weeks before the UA entrance exams. He was headed to the mall to grab some technical components for one of his projects, a modification for his web shooters that he planned to incorporate into the eventual Mark II version. He looked over his notebook as he walked down an alley he always used as a shortcut. If I'm right, I'll be able to condense the fluid into a sphere the size of a baseball that'll explode on impact, roughly 3 to 5 times the size of my standard web shot. I shall dub this my impact web. It will use a lot more of the web fluid, so maybe I should work on the storage capacity before dash. Crash. Oof. His train of thought was derailed when he heard someone cry out, along with the sound of several trash cans being knocked over. He quickly pocketed his notebook and turned towards the sound, and was surprised by what he saw. A little girl, looking no older than 5 to 6, was laying on the ground next to the toppled trash cans, tired and out of breath, as if she just ran a marathon. The little girl in question had long and unkempt blue-white hair, skin so pale it looked as if she'd never seen the sun, startling red eyes, and from the right side of her head was a small yellow-brown horn. She was wearing a short-sleeved dress that had clearly seen much better days, and Izuku's jaw dropped as he saw the many bandages wrapped around her arms and legs. Without any hesitation, he knelt down to her and helped her to her feet. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, mentally slapping himself on the back of the head for asking such a stupid question. Of course she wasn't. The girl looked up at him and tried to scuffle away, fear evident on her face. Izuku immediately held up his hands. Hey, easy. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help," he assured her. "I'm a good guy." She paused, looking at him, and Izuku had the odd feeling she was trying to look into his soul. Eventually, she moved a little closer, still looking a bit fearful. Only Izuku noticed the fear wasn't so much directed at him this time. What the hell has this kid been through to make her so scared? Noticing the bandages, he immediately thought I'd imagine she might have been abused. Or worse. One thing's for sure. I need to get her somewhere safe. "Let's start over," Izuku said with a smile. "My name's Izuku Midoriya. What's your name?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she replied, Eri. "Eri. That's a cute name. What are you doing out here?" "Are running away." "From who?" A few tears formed in the corners of her eyes, but she whispered, "From the bad men." That definitely set off warning bells in Izuku's head. Gesturing to her arms and legs, he asked, "Are they the ones who did that to you?" She didn't have to answer. The fear on her face was evident enough. "Okay, I'm going to get you somewhere safe. Once I do, I'll call the police and dash." "Eri, where the hell are you?" You little brat. Izuku's BLD ran cold when he heard the shout, his spider sense going off. Before he even registered what he was doing, he scooped Eri up in his arms and jumped up onto the roof of the nearby building, landing as gently as he could and making sure to stay away from the edge. And not a moment too soon, because he immediately heard footsteps coming down the alley. A second voice cursed out, "I thought you said she came down this way." The voice from earlier replied, "I thought I saw her duck down here. God damn it, the boss ain't gonna like this. You're telling me, if he finds out that we lost the little twerp, he'll have our heads for sure. DMN brat. She's more trouble than she's worth. Well, sadly the boss needs her, so we need to find her. Fine. Just hope the others are having better luck than we are." He heard them walk off down the alley, until eventually their footsteps faded away. Breathing a sigh of relief, he looked at Eri and said, "It's okay. They're gone now." It didn't do much to calm her down, since she still looked like a mouse who just saw a cat. So, without a word, Izuku pulled her into a hug, gently patting her back until she stopped shaking. "It's all right. I'm not going to let them take you." They separated, and he continued, "I promise, they're not going to get their dirty hands on you." He offered her his pinky. "Pinky promise." She looked at his pinky finger, then asked, "What's a pinky promise?" Izuku had to fight not to cry from just how adorable she looked and sounded right then. "It's what someone does when they make a promise they swear to never break. Like I am now." "Oh." She gingerly took his pinky in her little hand. "Like this?" "Close enough." Noticing the goosebumps on her exposed skin, and finally noticing she was barefoot and shivering, he immediately took off his coat and wrapped it around her, the coat being so big that it looked more like a blanket on her. "There. That should keep you warm." Pulling out his phone, he made to call the police, but immediately saw he had no service. "Wonderful," he muttered sarcastically. Putting it away, he muttered, "Should be able to get some decent signal in the mall. Only about a block away. Just gotta pray those guys don't see us and dash." He stopped when he noticed Eri looking at him weirdly, and he realized he was about to go into a mutter storm. "Sorry." Carefully picking her up with one arm, he slowly crawled down the wall down to the street. Keeping her in his arms, he explained to her, "I can't call for help her, so we're going to have to go to the mall. Once I have some signal, I'll make a call, and they'll hopefully send someone." Eri looked at him and asked, "You're not going to leave me, are you?" Izuku shook his head. "Never. I promise to protect you, and I never break my promises." Seemingly satisfied with his answer, Eri snuggled into his chest, noticing the warmth emanating from it. It felt nice. As they made it to the mall and slipped into the crowd, neither of them noticed the man watching them. His eyes narrowed as he saw the horn poking out from the coat bundle. "There you are, brat." Once they were inside, Izuku immediately made his way to the food court. That was the area he usually got the best reception in. Plus, he could hear Eri's stomach growling, and he could only imagine what she was forced to eat when she was held by those men. So he bought a pack of apple slices from a vending machine and fed them to Eri. Apparently he did something right, because she tore into them like he tore into a thing of Katsudon. With that taken care of, he called the police. After explaining the situation to the responder, who sounded like she was going to ignore it as a prank until Izuku mentioned a possibly/likely abused child, she said to sit tight and that a squad car would be there soon to take them to the station. Hopefully they'd get there soon, because Izuku really didn't like the idea of waiting for too long in a crowded mall full of people. His spider sense wasn't going off, but knowing his luck, it was only a matter of time before something happened. He was just about to call his mom and tell him he might be late when he heard a familiar voice say, "Oi, Deku." He turned to see Bakugo walking towards them, a soda in his hand and a burger wrapper in his other. "What took you so long?" Izuku winced. "Sorry, Kachin. Got a little sidetracked." He jerked his head towards Eri. Bakugo, upon seeing the girl eating the apple slices while wrapped up in Izuku's coat, looked back at Izuku and asked, "Do I even want to know what happened?" "This is Eri." "Okay. And you know her because I don't know the full story myself. What I do know is that when I found her, she was scared out of her mind, and she's covered in bandages. She said she was running away from some bad men, and and you being you, decided to help her and promised to protect her," Bakugo finished. Bashfully, Izuku nodded. "Yeah. The police are on their way to take us to the station. And she was hungry, so Yeah. Yeah, I get it. Looking at the little girl, he said, hey. She seemed a little apprehensive of him, so Izuku quickly explained, this is Bakugo. He's my friend. Don't worry, he may act scary, but he's really a nice guy. Seemingly satisfied with that, she looked at him and replied, hello, before going back to her food. Seeing the bandages on her arm peeking out of Izuku's coat, Bakugo growled. What kind of bass dash? Kachin, Izuku warned. Little girl. He winced. Sorry. What kind of monsters would do something like this to a little girl? Izuku sighed, seeing what Bakugo meant. I know what you mean. It's one thing to hear about this kind of stuff on the news and see stories about it on the web. It's another thing to see the results firsthand. At least they didn't follow you guys here. Suddenly his spider sense went off, just as there was a loud thwomp, and the glass doors shattered into dust, with the metal frames being blown off of their hinges. Bakugo groaned. Me and my big mouth. Through the now destroyed entrance walked a man wearing a heavily padded maroon and yellow costume, the yellow parts having a diamond weave pattern that made them look like they came from a quilt, while the maroon parts were styled around his body to look like a sleeveless jacket. His mask was mostly yellow with a maroon panel that covered the top of his head, and 2 maroon lenses that covered his eyes like sunglasses. On both of his arms were 2 large silver gauntlets that had what looked like large blocky knuckle dusters built in, each one having a trigger for his thumb. He glanced around the food court, seemingly looking for something, and then he saw Eri, Izuku, and Bakugo, and while they couldn't see it, they could feel his eyes locked onto them. He started taking a few steps towards them, but was stopped when someone yelled out, freeze. 2 police officers walked in, guns drawn and pointed right at the man. Mizufu Police Department. Put your hands on your head and turn around slowly, one officer said. Don't try anything funny, pal. We will shoot, the other cop added. I ain't your pal, moron, the man said, turning around as his gauntlets began to glow. Call me. Shocker. He threw his fists forward, and the gauntlets blasted out a powerful shock wave that sent the officers flying back several feet. One of them regained their bearings and attempted to shoot him with his pistol, but the bullets bounced off of his costume like they were RBB. He sent another blast at the officer that knocked him down to the ground and skidding back a couple of feet. Once that was over, he yelled, all right, green-haired boy. I know you're in here. Hand over the girl, and I might consider letting you walk out of her alive. He fired off 2 shockwaves, one from each hand, at the thankfully empty walkways above the exits into the mall, causing them to collapse and block them. The entire time that was happening, the rest of the people in the food court did the wise thing and immediately ran, either for escape or to take cover. Izuku, Bakugo, and Eri were doing a bit of both, doing their best to make an escape while also taking cover behind whatever they could find so that Shocker wouldn't find them. Right now, they were hidden behind trash cans that were right on the edge of the food court, Izuku doing his best to keep Eri calm while Bakugo was looking back and forth trying to find an escape route. He cursed mentally and said, we try to go anywhere and he'll see us. And there's no way in hell we're handing Eri over to him, Izuku replied. Carefully poking his head around the trash can, he took mental notes on the man's quirk. He seems to be able to create concentrated vibrations that he fires from his gauntlets. Judging by the fact he's wearing a full-bodied suit, it must be designed to handle the feedback from it. Gives him some serious defense, too, if it deflected those bullets. Think my explosions could hurt him? Only if you make a really big one, the kind that leaves your arms sore. And even then, I'm not sure it'd do much more than stun him. Bakugo grumbled, that's just great. Can't get the hell out of here, and we can't fight him. Izuku nodded, before looking at his coat wrapped around Eri, specifically at the pocket that held his web shooters. He then looked to the front entrance, then above at the balcony above it, and said, but maybe I can keep him stuck long enough to make our escape. Got a plan? Bakugo asked. Yeah. He pulled his web shooters out of his coat, strapping them onto his wrists. Once he was sure they were tight, he said, wait for my signal, then run for the front entrance. Be careful. You're one to talk. Looking down at Eri, he softly told her, stay with Bakugo. He'll protect you. We both will. She looked up at him, fear evident in her eyes. You will come back? Right. Izuku nodded, pulling her into a hug. I will be right back. I promise. She held out her hand. Pinky promise? He smiled, holding out his pinky, which she wrapped her little hand around. Pinky promise. Once she let go, Izuku poked his head out around the trash can, seeing Shocker was looking the opposite way, and fired off a web line on the ceiling. With a bit of a spider jump, he quickly zipped up onto the ceiling, pressing himself against it and praying that Shocker didn't notice him. Fortunately, his luck held out as he managed to crawl across the ceiling and then lowered himself to perch on the railing of the balcony. Gotta love it when they don't look up, he mused internally. Once he made sure his feet were firmly adhered to the railing, he looked over at the trash cans to see Bakugo looking up at him, the bundled-up Eri already in his arms. He mouthed, "Get ready." Bakugo nodded and mouthed back, "Ready when you are." Izuku looked down, seeing Shocker was right below him. Well, here goes nothing. He aimed and fired 2 web lines that stuck to Shocker's shoulders, eliciting a very loud, "What the F dash?" Before he could finish that sentence, Izuku yanked on the lines hard, his enhanced strength pulling him up in the air and spinning him until he was looking right into Izuku's eyes. Taking advantage of this, Izuku shot 2 new web lines that both stuck to Shocker's face and yelled language, before pulling down hard and slamming the villain down face first onto the thick metal railing with a very audible clong. Izuku then followed it up by spraying a large amount of webbing over Shocker, effectively wrapping him up in a cocoon. The moment Izuku pulled Shocker off the ground, Bakugo picked up Eri and took off sprinting towards the entrance, praying that he and Izuku's luck would hold out and he could get the little girl in his arms to the police cars he saw pulling up to the mall outside. Sadly, it seemed that their luck finally ran out. Full-body shockwave. The cocoon glowed white before a large radial shockwave shot out, tearing the webbing apart and freeing Shocker from his sticky prison. To make matters worse, Shocker stood between Bakugo and Eri and the exit, with roughly only 3 feet between them. Shocker blinked before aiming his gauntlet at Bakugo. Hand over the girl. Bakugo glared at the villain before setting Eri down behind him. He then turned to face Shocker, his palms popping and sparking before growling, "No chance in hell, mattress man. You want the girl, you gotta go through me first." Shocker laughed at that. "Sheesh, you kids these days. You all got some sort of hero complex." He aimed his right gauntlet right at Bakugo's head as it started to glow. "Don't worry. This won't hurt you too much." Thwip, thwip. He paused as 2 web lines shot down onto the ground on either side of him. He turned around, incoming, just in time for the familiar red sneakers of one Izuku Midoriya to slam into his face, having used the web lines to slingshot himself into the villain. The force of the double kick was strong enough to knock him down, face first into the tiled floor, many of the tiles cracking under the impact in a spiderweb pattern. Capitalizing on it, Izuku unloaded a large amount of webbing onto the villain, all but plastering Shocker to the ground. "Stick around," he quipped. "Did I seriously just quip right now?" Wonder if his spider quirk messed with his personality, Bakugo mentally asked. A growl came from the webbed-down villain, and Izuku's spider sense flared just as he saw the white glow from within the webs. "Oh, come on!" Full-body shockwave. The shockwave propelled Izuku several feet away, slamming back first into a pillar and knocking the wind out of him. Bakugo and Eri were both sent flying, but Bakugo managed to grab her in midair and took the brunt of the damage when they landed. Wincing, he looked at Eri and asked, "You okay, Munchkin?" Eri blinked before replying, "I am scared." Pushing himself to a sitting position, he put a hand on her head and said, "Don't be scared. You get scared, that's when the bad guys win. But you're hurt, and so's Izuzu." Bakugo winced as he felt the bruises forming on his back. Remembering their fight with the hobgoblin, he replied, "Trust me, we've been through worse." He then smiled and ruffled her hair. "Besides, people get knocked down all the time. Heroes are the ones who get back up and keep fighting. And they don't give up until they win." Seeing Shocker start to get back up, Bakugo pushed himself to his feet and finished, "And Deku and I both promise to keep you safe. No villain in a silly-looking costume is going to make a liar out of us." Shocker growled, his gauntlets beginning to glow. "You punks shouldn't make promises you can't keep." Throwing his hands forward, he yelled, "Double shockwave." Bakugo moved to shield Eri, but he heard THWIP, thwip, and something quickly pulled him and Eri out of the line of fire. Once he was back on the ground, he saw that the thing on his chest was a web line, and they were pulled to safety courtesy of Izuku. Cut it a little closer. Why don't cha? Bakugo grumbled. Sorry about that, he replied. Checking Eri over, he loaded new web cartridges into his web shooters and said, took a while to stop seeing stars. Seeing that they were still a good distance away from the exit, and that Shocker was still between them and the doors, Bakugo asked, you wouldn't happen to have another plan up your sleeve, would you? Not really. His shockwaves can tear through my webs. We try and just blitz our way to the doors. He'll more than likely collapse the entrance on top of it and block our way out. Considering my spider strength enhanced hits didn't so much as stun him, and he's not hurt by his own quirk, the suit is pretty much armor. Maybe blind him with my stun grenade, Bakugo asked, referring to the new move they came up with when they were training. Those lenses are more than likely meant to protect him from flashbangs or stun grenades. Seeing him turning towards them, Izuku added, and judging by his body language, he's angry. Really angry. I can relate, Bakugo grumbled. So, no plan? I'm out of ideas. The only way I could see stopping him would be to trap him by collapsing the ceiling. But aside from the collateral damage we get blamed for and arrested for, he'd probably just blast through it with his shockwaves and come after us again. So, hope a pro hero comes and dash. Shut up. They all clammed up at Shocker's annoyed outrage. I have had enough of this bullshit. Now hand over the girl, or else I'll dash. Texas smash. Whatever Shocker was about to say was drowned out as a mighty gust of wind sent him flying away into a nearby pillar, shattering it completely in a shower of marble. Courtesy of All Might, who had just arrived in the mall, this time in his actual hero costume. He looked at the three of them, he smiled and said, you two again. All Might. Izuku stuttered. Looking at Bakugo, he said, geez, what are the odds? You're telling me, he grumbled. The police notified me of what was going on. All Might explained. Is the little girl okay? Izuku looked and saw Eri hiding behind his leg, doing her best to hide. Inside of his coat. It's all right, Eri. This is All Might. Eri poked her head out and okayed at Izuku, then to All Might, and then back at Izuku and asked who's All Might. There was an audible silence for about 5 seconds before Izuku asked Eri, have you seriously never heard of All Might? She shook her head. No. Bakugo shook his head in a mix of anger and disbelief. Those beast jerks must have been keeping her in a cave for her to never hear of the greatest hero of all time. It is shocking. All Might tapped his chin to remember and asked Bakugo, was it? Seeing Bakugo nod, he continued, but not impossible. Besides, I'd actually argue Steve Rogers is a far greater hero than I am. Meh. Subjective. For now, though, the three of you should get to the police. He looked at the rising form of Shocker again and said, I'll handle our fine-dressed felon. Be careful. All Might, Izuku stated. He's able to create powerful vibrations that he channels and fires through his gauntlets as powerful shockwaves. He's also able to unleash them from his suit in a full-body blast. His suit also protects him from the feedback from his blasts and from other attacks. The fact that he managed to give that much information in the span of 5 seconds impressed Toshinori, enough that he made a mental note to tell Nizu about this later. But for now he smiled and said, thank you for the intel, young Midoriya. But fear not. I've tangled with plenty of villains with dangerous quirks. I'll be fine. Now go. Picking Eri up, he and Bakugo ran towards the entrance and out into the police barricade. They never made it. Shockwave cannon, the powerful and fast blast slammed into the entrance above the doors, creating an avalanche of debris that completely cut them off from the outside. Izuku sighed under his breath. We really can't catch a break, can we? He deadpanned. Seeing that out of the corner of his eye, All Might's sweat dropped and said, quite unfortunate. All Might. Shocker was now standing in front of the four of them. Only instead of sounding terrified, he actually sounded pleased with himself. What an honor. The Japanese symbol of peace, coming to fight me. I'm a little starstruck. You'll be seeing stars when I'm through with you, villain. All Might replied. Though I am surprised you're still conscious after taking a smash to the face. He rubbed his jaw. Not gonna lie, even through this suit I felt that. It tickled. Well, I'll make sure this next one knocks you out cold. That child will not be going with you, Shocker. Not while I am here. To their surprise, Shocker just laughed and said, You talk a big game, big guy. But I can take you. His gauntlets began glowing to an almost blinding white, and he yelled, now, take this. My most powerful attack. Destroyer Dash. Pennsylvania's Smash. All Might lunged forward with a powerful right uppercut, connecting with Shocker's chin. Time seemed to stop for a nanosecond before a sound like that of an artillery shell being fired was heard, and Shocker was sent flying up 5 stories and smashed into the ceiling. All Might looked up at him and said, you talk too much. Shocker remained there for a minute, before falling off and slamming down into the ground, cracking the marble tiles even further. He didn't get back up, but they could tell he was still breathing. Just to be sure, All Might checked his pulse. He's alive, just unconscious. Eri looked at the large hero in awe. He's so strong. He took out that guy with one smash, Izuku stated, similarly awestruck. Bakugo, however, laughed at the sight of Shocker knocked out cold. That's what you get for thinking you can take on the best in the world, Mattress Man, he mocked, flipping him the bird after making sure that Eri wouldn't see him do it. All Might looked at the 3 of them and asked, are the 3 of you all right? They all nodded. A little bruised, Izuku admitted. But I'll live. Bakugo shrugged, my pride, mostly, and my back. Thanks for saving us, All Might, Izuku said. Again. It's no trouble, young man, All Might replied. But this is the second time I've saved you and young Bakugo from a villain. I really hope this doesn't become a habit. Seeing Eri in Izuku's arms, he asked, so this villain was after her? Izuku and Bakugo both nodded. I'm not sure why, Izuku said. But from all the bandages on her arms and how scared she was, I can't imagine it would be for anything good. All Might's expression didn't change, but they both could tell he was angry. Well, first we should get her to a hospital to make sure she's not hurt or sick. After that, the police will probably have some questions for her. Izuku could feel Eri tighten her grip on his shirt. I'm going with you too, Eri, he immediately said, ruffling her hair with his free hand. Don't worry. You ain't getting rid of me either, Munchkin, Bakugo stated, messing with her hair. You're stuck with the both of us. Well, that's a good thing, All Might stated, since both of you will need to give statements to the police. Which means both of us are probably in for another scolding from the police for borderline vigilante work, Bakugo groaned. Again. More me than you this time, Izuku said. I was the one who crawled on the ceiling, hit the guy with several super-strength punches and kicks. And I set off small explosions in my hands to try and intimidate the guy. That still counts as illegal quirk usage. Last I checked. Bakugo smirked, holding out his fist. We go down together, Deku. Izuku sighed, but smiled and returned Bakugo's fist bump. All Might couldn't help but smirk. These two were something else. Once All Might moved enough of the rubble for them to get out, he escorted them to a waiting police van and past a crowd of waiting reporters. Izuku did his best to shield Eri from the reporters, feeling she'd been through enough that day. Soon as they were inside the van, Izuku looked at Eri and said, It's gonna be okay, Eri. You're safe now. She looked up at Izuku and asked, The bad men won't find me? He nodded. They won't. And even if they do, we'll protect you. All Might, the police, the pro-heroes dash. You and Bakugo? Yep. We're gonna protect you, every step of the way. Eri seemed to relax at that statement, and Izuku noticed that she seemed really tired. Not that he could blame her after everything that just happened. And clearly he was right, because a minute later she passed out, her head pressed against Izuku like he was a human pillow. He didn't mind it. Not at all. Sweet dreams, Eri. Meanwhile, outside the mall, a man was watching the police cars and news vans reporting on the scene. He wasn't much to look at. Short black hair, green jacket with purple fur around the neck, black pants and plain boots. Really the only thing that stood out about him was his mask, a plague doctor's mask colored red with gold accents. But if one were to look into his eyes, within his gold irises they would see a dark void, completely empty of any sort of empathy or sympathy. There was no love within the man, no kindness, no joy, just cold fury. This was Kai Chisaki, the current leader of the Shai Hasaikai, the 8 Precepts of Death. Once a powerful Yakuza group. Thanks to heroes like All Might, they were now but a shadow of their former selves. Kai sought to rebuild, to reclaim their former glory and put an end to the disease, the sickness known as heroism. But sadly, the tool he needed, the key to all of that, had escaped his grasp. Eri, that little girl, and her extraordinary quirk were exactly the thing he needed to achieve his dreams. But somehow, someway, she had escaped from their hideout and gotten out into the world. And now, as he watched Japan's #1 pro hero escort her and two teenage boys into a police van, he finally felt that cold fury turn into bubbling, boiling rage. He clenched his fists to the point he would have drawn BLD from his palms had he not been wearing gloves. Wonderful. Just wonderful, he grumbled, his voice muffled by his mask. He turned down the alleyway, seeing two of his subordinates looking at him with fearful eyes. As they should be, he mused. Remind me again why I shouldn't dispose of you two imbeciles right now, he asked. Both of them were quaking in their boots, but one of them finally stuttered out, BB, because there was no way we'd be able to beat that guy with a mattress costume, BB boss. P+, you wanted to keep our activities on the down low. If we caused a big scene in the mall, me and his faces would be plastered all over the 5 o'clock news, the other idiot added. Mulling it over in his head, he realized they both had valid points. Okay, you idiots live. Once they breathed a sigh of relief, he glared and added, for now. But I want to make this very clear to both of you. One more screw-up as colossal as this, and you can kiss your asses goodbye. YYSSIR. They both yelled in unison. Good. Now, get out of my sight. Once they scampered off, he pulled out his phone and dialed the number. Once the person on the other end answered, he said, It's me. I take it things didn't go well. You watching the news right now? Yes. You want us to pack up and head to the backup base? He mulled it over in his thoughts for a few moments. While he didn't think Eri would give the heroes any information that would be particularly useful, there was always that one chance she might. Plus, once they saw the extent of what he put her through, they'd probably want nothing more than to make sure he and his fellow Yakuza were put behind bars. So he sighed before saying do it, just to be on the safe side. Bringing up the news app on his phone, he saw that one of the reporters had apparently gotten video footage from one of the civilians of what happened inside with this shocker guy. Seeing the green-haired boy and the blonde-haired boy trying their best to protect little Eri, he added, and find out whatever you can about the two boys who decided to play hero. Got it, boss. He hung up and pocketed his phone, promising himself that when he found those two boys, they were going to pay. Nobody messes with the Shy Hasaikai, and nobody crossed Overhaul and lived to tell about it. The ride to the hospital went smoothly, something Izuku was thankful for. Considering they had All Might with them, he figured it was to be expected. On the ride, he texted his mom and explained what happened, being sure to mention that he and Bakugo were okay and weren't hurt, which wasn't stretching the truth too far. Bakugo only had minor bruising on his back that would heal up in a day or two, and his own bruises would be healed up by the time his mom got to the hospital. Thank God for his minor healing factor. Eri slept the whole way there, still using Izuku as her human pillow. Bakugo was looking at his phone, probably texting his own mom to make sure she didn't worry, because as much as Bakugo might claim, I don't care. What that OLD hag thinks, he did care. A lot. Once they arrived, the police escorted them in to see the doctors, who had been informed ahead of time about what was happening. All Might had left to go deal with some other hero work, of which he didn't go into detail, but they didn't ask. This led to a bit of a problem once Eri woke up. Izuku and Bakugo made it through the doctor's exams quickly and with no issues, neither of them being injured in the fight beyond some superficial bruising, and barely there in Izuku's case, which made him remember what his father said about the spiders all having slightly advanced healing. So he figured he must have a slight healing factor. Eri, on the other hand, was a different story. She refused to leave Izuku's side, to the point that she kept an iron grip on his shirt. Any attempt by the doctors to get close to her, let alone touch her, would cause her to freak out and fearfully hide behind Izuku. The worst part, however, was when she saw one of the doctors pull out a needle to take a small BLD sample. The look of sheer, unadulterated terror on her face was bad enough. But then she started muttering to herself, Not again. Not again. Please stop. Please stop. Over and over again like a mantra until the doctor put the needle away and everyone else backed off. Even then, it took about a half an hour to get her to calm down enough for Izuku to be able to talk to her. It took another hour to get her to let the doctors do simple things like get her height and weight, temperature, and BLD pressure. Eventually, he managed to convince her to let him and Bakugo remove her bandages. And what they found shocked them and made Bakugo have to leave the room, so that Eri wouldn't hear him curse like a sailor. All along her arms, legs, part of her stomach, and along her neck and collarbone were covered in scar. Some looked like insertion wounds from a needle, some looked like they were made by a scalpel. A few were so fresh he could still see the marks left from where the stitches had been put in. Frankly, Eri looked like she had been used as a living game of operation, but with someone constantly hitting the sides. On purpose. And with how old some of the scars looked? Yeah, this had been going on for a long time. The doctors decided that keeping her in the hospital for too long would more than likely stress her out even worse. So they did a quick check for infections, with Izuku helping to keep her calm, then gave him a few alcohol wipes to clean any open wounds, since she still wouldn't let anyone except Izuku and Bakugo so much as touch her, and some new bandages. By the time they were finally done, Izuku's mom and Bakugo's mom had arrived, as did the chief of police, the dog-headed Kenji Tsurigami. He gave Izuku and Bakugo, since he insisted, the usual lecture about using quirks in public without proper licenses, but they both felt he didn't really put much effort into it. He even admitted that what they did was slightly justified. Since there was a little girl's life on the line, the first thing that Izuku did was to call the police, and there wasn't much he could do before All Might arrived. Frankly, his actions stopped a bad situation from getting worse. But sadly, rules are rules, as unfair as they may be. Still, he just left the two of them off with a warning and told them to make sure it didn't happen again. He then went out to deal with the media, who had surrounded the hospital waiting for a statement on what happened. And then came Eri's situation. Unfortunately, her statement won't amount to much in the court of law, Detective Sakachi explained. Children don't always have reliable memories, unless they have quirks for it, and even then a lawyer would just say she could be making it up for attention. Mitsuki scoffed. Yeah, because any 6-year-old could give themselves those cuts and marks. You would be amazed at what some lawyers will come up with, he replied. That's why we're leaning HRD on that shocker guy. See if he can tell us who did this to Eri and why. But rest assured, we will find the people who did this to her and make sure they're punished to the fullest extent of the law. Izuku looked down at Eri, who was sitting in his lap and holding his hand. Looking back up at the detective, he asked, "So, what's going to happen to Eri?" The detective looked at him and said, "Well, ordinarily it would be up to child services. She'd probably end up in either foster care or dash. She's staying with us." Everyone looked at Inko, a bit surprised by her statement, except for Mitsuki, who just smirked. Sakachi found his voice and asked, Mrs. Midoriya, I don't dash." She fixed him with a look that froze him in place and spoke in a tone that left no room for argument. "I've been through the foster system, detective. In all due respect, the odds of her actually finding a family, a good, loving family, are about 1,000,000 to 1. I make enough of an income that I can provide for the three of us, and I am more than willing to work from home so that I can take care of her." She then smiled as she glanced at Izuku and Eri. "And besides, my son may very well be the first person to ever show her any kindness or human decency. Considering she hasn't left his side the entire time, I don't think separating them would do her any favors." Izuku and Bakugo were a bit surprised by that. His mother had told him that her parents weren't actually her BRTH parents, but she never told him that she had been in the foster system. Mitsuki laughed and said, "I just bring her the adoption forms, detective. When she gets like this, nothing short of an act of God's gonna change her mind. And I don't think she'll mind," Izuku added. Just to be sure, he looked at Eri and asked Eri, "Do you want to live with me and my mother?" Eri looked at him in surprise, then at Inko with a look of apprehension and a bit of fear. "As she's not gonna hurt me, is she?" He and Inko both shook their heads. "No, sweetie," she said, giving her a warm and reassuring smile. "I would never hurt a child." She slowly and gently brushed a few strands of Eri's hair out of her face, especially one who's already been through so much. They held eye contact for a few moments, and Eri could see the sincerity and kindness within her green eyes, just like Izuku's eyes. So tentatively, she held out her hand and asked, Pinky promise? Inko smiled before holding out her pinky, which Eri wrapped her hand around. Pinky promise. Mitsuki leaned towards Bakugo and whispered, she does know that's not how you do a pinky promise, right? That's how Deku showed her how to do it, he whispered back. Considering the shitshow we were just in, we didn't have time to explain how to do an actual one. Once Eri let go of Inko's finger, she then pulled Eri into a hug. Eri was surprised for a moment, before relaxing as she felt a similar warmth she felt when Izuku hugged her. She felt safe, something she'd never felt when she was with the bad men. Getting over his shock, Sakachi eventually said, "All right, I guess if she's okay with it, I'll see about getting those adoption papers. I'll be right back." Once he exited the room, Mitsuki sighed before looking at her son and Izuku. "You two just can't stay out of trouble, can you?" Bakugo shrugged. "It's not like we go out into the street and yell, 'Hey villains, come get some.'" Izuku chuckled, but then got serious and added, "Plus, what was I supposed to do? Just leave her alone?" It was 25 degrees out, and she was barefoot without any sort of coat on. I couldn't just leave her to freeze to death. And then she mentioned the bad men. And what kind of person would I be if I just let them take her back? Gently rubbing Eri's head, Inko proudly said, "And that proves that your father and I raised you right." No arguments there. Everything else that happened at the mall was just bad luck. He looked at Bakugo's smirking face and said, Yeah, I know, Kachin. I'm a trouble magnet." "Hey, you said it, not me." As the two sniped at each other, Mitsuki turned to Inko and asked, "You sure you're going to be able to handle adding her to your family?" Inko smiled and nodded. "Absolutely. Hisashi and I always wanted to add another member to the family. But then he got the job in America." And then she trailed off, and Mitsuki was surprised to see she wasn't crying. Composing herself, she finished, "It's too bad he's not here to see it. He'd love her." Mitsuki nodded, before looking at Izuku and Bakugo, who were still bantering back and forth. "Think he'd be proud of your little munchkin for what he did?" she asked. She chuckled, before looking out the window at the clear blue sky. "I'm sure he's very proud of him." At that moment, the door opened and Sakachi walked in holding a stack of papers and a tablet, which had a video queued up. "We may have a problem. Not with the adoption," he quickly added when he saw Inko's eyes narrow, "but, well, just watch this." He held the tablet in front of them and pressed play, and the video played. It was a news report, and to their surprise it showed some amateur cell phone footage of what happened at the mall. Izuku face-slamming Shocker into the ground, Bakugo popping off a couple of explosions to intimidate Shocker while Eri hid behind him, finally finishing with the 3 children being escorted out by All Might. Detective Sakachi turned it off and said, "This is playing on every news channel across Japan. We managed to keep your names out of it for now, but given this day and age of social media, it's only a matter of time before our classmates blab and some nosy reporter overhears it," Izuku finished. Bakugo grumbled, "And since the press ain't exactly known for restraint, we'll probably be swarmed the moment we step out of the hospital or leave our homes to go to school." Sakachi nodded grimly. "Unfortunately," Inko sighed. "So, what do we do? With all the media attention, whoever's after Eri will probably figure out where we live. And considering they had a guy like the Cushion on their team, they're not going to hesitate to knock down buildings just to get to her or tear people apart." Mitsuki added, everyone getting a brief chuckle at Mitsuki's nickname for Shocker. "Moving out of the city probably won't help either," Izuku said, adding in his thoughts. "It's spread over every news channel in Japan, and I'd imagine that cell phone video will probably show up on YouTube in about." He looked at his phone and seemed to do some math in his head. "An hour, give or take. Everyone's going to see it. So, what do we do?" Sakachi looked at his phone as it pinged, read the contents of the message, then smiled and nodded. "Well, I made a few calls, and I think I might have a solution." Everyone looked at him, with Bakugo asking, "And that is?" Of all the plans they could have come up with, none of them, especially Izuku, ever expected this to be one of them. They were standing in what looked like a luxury condo, a lot bigger than the Midoriya's old apartment. Nice open floor plan, decent furniture, it honestly looked like it belonged to someone much more well-off than them. And of course, there was the matter of its location, which happened to be on UA's campus. "I don't know what I'm more shocked about," Mitsuki said after getting over her shock. "The fact that we're going to be staying here, or the fact that UA's campus is big enough to have this place. Well, to be fair, we were actually planning on putting in a dormitory this year. So consider this a test run. They all turned to see the speaker, the almost 3-foot-tall animalistic principal of UA. High school, Nizu. He smiled at them all and happily asked, "Am I a mouse? A dog? Or perhaps a bear? All you need to know is that I'm the principal." Eri looked at Izuku and asked, "Izuku, why is the stuffed animal talking to us?" Everyone looked at Eri in surprise, especially Nizu, before laughing and smiling at what she said. "I have to admit," Nizu said, getting his laughter under control, "that's a new one." Izuku knelt down and ruffled her hair. "Eri, Nizu is actually an animal who has a quirk that makes him as smart as a human. Actually, a lot smarter. And last I checked, he's not stuffed." "Oh no, my lunch isn't for another hour," he joked with a smile. He then looked at everyone and said, "So, are the accommodations to your liking?" Inko looked around and replied, "It's a lot. But we do appreciate this." He smiled. "Well, I assure you, you all will be safe here." The detective guy did say UA is pretty much the most heavily fortified place in all of Japan, Mitsuki said. Next to the Hero Public Safety Commission's main HQ. Bakugo nodded. "No kidding. That barrier had to be like 10 feet of solid steel." "Not quite," Nizu replied. "It's actually 9 feet of solid steel wrapped around a 1-foot core of solid titanium. Much more durable." He whistled. "Still, not a lot of people are getting through that. Plus, there's at least 10 pro heroes, and they have plenty of others they can call in if something happens," Izuku stated. "If whoever's after Eri does try to come here, they're either really desperate, really brave dash, or really, really stupid," Bakugo finished. Izuku nodded and added, "or some combo of all three. Though frankly I think that would make them more dangerous than they already are." "That tends to be the case," Nizu admitted. He looked at Inko and Mitsuki and said, "We're coordinating with the police on this. We're still working out a plan, but for now this will be the safest place for all of you until the scoundrels who did this to young Eri are captured." "What about their schooling?" Inko asked. Izuku said, "We've only got a little over 2 months until school's over. We can just finish online. Ain't like we got actual friends in that school." Bakugo muttered under his breath. Nizu seemed to take notice of that, but kept it to himself. With that out of the way, we do have a few things to address. Looking at Inko and Mitsuki, he said, "While it was your sons and Eri that ended up on the news, there's a chance the Yakuza might discover who you are and try to use you for leverage. Because you can find just about anything on the internet nowadays," Inko sighed. "It's both a blessing and a curse," Nizu admitted. "Still, if you need to leave for anything, whether it be your jobs or for groceries, you'll have an undercover officer accompanying you for your protection. Along with that, you'll have to wear trackers so that we know where you are at all times." Inko and Mitsuki nodded at that. "I don't think my hubby will have a problem with that," Mitsuki said. "Good." Looking at Izuku and Bakugo, he continued, "I doubt the two of you will want to remain locked in this place for days on end. Therefore, you'll have to wear trackers when you leave, and you'll have to probably disguise yourselves. Nothing too problematic with that," Izuku replied. "Some hoodies, sunglasses, and hats, and we'll blend right in. We just gotta make sure not to draw too much attention to ourselves." He looked over at Bakugo and added, "So, try not to blow up on anyone, okay?" "Hey, for your information, I've been a lot calmer lately," he replied with a glare. "Yeah, ever since we started hanging out and being friends again, and I started playing the little shoulder angel to your shoulder demon," Izuku snarked back. "That still doesn't mean you don't have anger issues. And like so many of my other issues, I'm working on it." Izuku smirked and rolled his eyes. "Yeah, sure." He then looked at Nizu and asked, "So, did they get anything out of that shocker guy yet?" Nizu shook his head. "Unfortunately, he's been quite tight-lipped, but I'm sure they'll eventually get him to talk." "What makes you so sure about that?" "Well, they managed to ID him after they took him in and removed his suit and gear. The man calling himself Shocker is in fact Jun Miburui." Mirai Sasaki, known in the pro-hero community as Sir Night-Eye, looked at the file that was handed to him by Detective Sakachi, the picture showing a man in his late 20s, with dark eyes and brown hair. Opening it, he read, "Hero school dropout, became a mercenary for the highest bidder. Multiple counts of destruction of property due to his quirk. tremor, which lets him create powerful vibrations capable of reaching the power of a small earthquake. But he needs his gauntlets and suit to protect himself from the feedback, and can only use the quirk at a distance with his gauntlets. Is responsible for multiple cases of theft, roughly 56.7 billion yen in property damage, and injuring/killing several people whether on purpose or by accident. Looking up from the file, he asked, and while I'm glad that a dangerous merc like this is off the streets, and that those two boys managed to save that little girl he was after, I find myself having to ask, what does this have to do with me? The detective sighed. We managed to get him to talk with the promise of a plea deal with a reduced sentence if he could give us something useful. And he did. Mostly. Taking a sip from his coffee, he continued he refused to tell us the people who hired him, citing that A, he prides himself on keeping his clients confidential, and B, he doesn't even know. He got contacted anonymously on the dark web with a job offer and got the details when he accepted, which I assume was to capture the little girl Eri, and bring her to them for some nefarious reason, Mirai asked. Exactly. Though he did tell us that whoever hired him was willing to pay 8 figures for her to be captured and delivered to them. Mirai whistled at that. So whoever hired him must have money to burn. But that's not the interesting part. As it turns out, part of the intel was a warning about the people who were currently Eri's caretakers, he said, putting air quotes on the word, before pulling out a file and sliding it to Mirai. Mirai opened the file, and his eyes widened. Are you sure this is legit? As sure as I can be. Figured you'd want to be the first to know, since this is linked to your case. Seeing the pictures of the scars on Eri's arms and legs, he asked if that's true, then what were the Shaiha Saikai doing to this young girl? Not sure, Sakachi admitted. But based on how scared she was of the doctors, and the panic attack she had when one of them pulled out a syringe with a needle, he let that thought hang in the air, and Mirai closed the folders. Thank you, detective. This will no doubt come in handy to my investigation. Sakachi nodded with a smile. Happy to help. That night, Izuku sighed as he looked up at the ceiling of his new room. They had spent most of the day moving the stuff from their 2 houses into their new accommodations, and then finally had dinner and were now turning in for the night. And he couldn't sleep a wink. Admittedly, this was kind of expected. Him and his mother had lived in that apartment since he was a baby. That place was home, and while the rent was still being paid and they could eventually go back, it still felt weird knowing that they wouldn't be going back there for quite a while. The other reason he couldn't sleep was because his mind was catching up to just how much his life had changed in under a year. First the spider bite that gave him his quirk, then the Cybermax Tower incident, his father's death, becoming friends with Bakugo again, the Hobgoblin, and meeting All Might, and now today with saving Eri and moving on to the UA campus. All that change just seemed to be happening so fast. Though on the subject of Eri, he looked down to see Eri curled up against his side, fast asleep. He found it amazing that despite all that she'd been through, all the horrors she no doubt faced from the bad men, that she could sleep so peacefully. Admittedly, his mother told him not to be surprised if she woke up one night screaming from a nightmare. But for now, Eri seemed to be having nothing but peaceful dreams. Seeing this, Izuku smiled and whispered, "Sweet dreams, Eri." Looking back up at the ceiling, he thought maybe not all of the change is so bad after all. And with that thought, he eventually drifted off to sleep. This marks the end of part 1 of What If Deku Became Japan's First Spider Hero. A big thanks to Spider-Izuku for granting the permission to feature this amazing fanfiction. Please like the video and subscribe to Deku Universe for more interesting stories. Thank you, and see you soon.